Hey guys and girls, do you like science? Well, I do. And on this episode of the spin-off show, I've got my good friend, Mr. Adam Morris, up from Canada, joining the show, the resident jock and nerd science expert. But he's much more than that. He's actually working for the Canadian government doing environmental science and marine toxicology for a fucking living. If those two things are synonymous, I don't fucking know. But he's on our show, or he's on my show, talking about polar bears, Inuit people, how climate change is affecting the Arctic, how contaminants are affecting the populations up in the Arctic, the carnivores and the people up in the Arctic. We dive into climate change stuff in general, and if it's real. We jump into the little bit of flat earth stuff. We jump into the debates that are held between scientists and politicians. We nerd out a little bit at the end. We even get into a near-death story of Adam Morris's trials and tribulations up in the Arctic. So I think this is a really interesting, science-y, nerdy show. I love science. Hopefully you do too. Let's check out this episode. This is the Jock Spin-Off Show. Well, Adam, we're recording now, so I think we should just start doing this, huh, man?
Sounds good.
I've been wanting to have you on for a long time now. And by a long time, I mean since I started recording this spin-off show, so that would probably be 4 or 5 weeks, so not that long. But how you been, man?
I've been very good, very good. I've been looking to get back on the Jock and Nerd show as per usual as well, so this worked out nicely.
Nice.
Something a little different.
It is a little different. Now, the listeners will have already heard an intro, but I'm just going to restate the fact that, Adam, you've been on our show a few times now. You were on episode 155. That was your debut on the Jock and Nerd podcast. We did Science of Superheroes.
It's a lot of fun.
Then we did Jock and Nerd 215, Science of Aquaman. And then we did Jock and Nerd 232, What the Fuck Happened, Masters of the Universe, with you and Matt Delhauer.
That was a lot of fun. Wow.
We've also had you on Jock Talk, but in your own words, who are you? I know you're a scientist, you're a doctor, you have a PhD. How the hell would you describe yourself?
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, I'm a wildlife toxicologist. I work primarily with big predators and other animals in the Arctic of Canada, and we look at how the toxicology of those animals works. So really how contaminants are getting into the Arctic, how they're building up through the animals, whether or not they're getting to a concentration in those animals. It's like a concern, particularly because most of what we study are still traditional food sources for the Inuit people that hunt them regularly. So their lifestyle is a lot different than ours. So we try to frame a lot of our work in ways that benefits their communities and their lifestyles as well. So it's not just, us measuring things for the sake of measuring them. We're looking for effects in the animals that might translate to effects to humans. And most recently, I'm also looking at more holistic kind of science in polar bears and seals, which are their main food source. We're looking at how the whole mixture of stuff that we find in the environment, in terms of the contaminants, but also in terms of, say, changes in ice conditions, changes in temperatures, changes in the food sources, how all these things are affecting the animal's health. And then kind of tagged along with that, we're also looking at how specific climate change effects, like, again, temperatures and things like that, will affect the contaminant trends by themselves. So we're looking at, again, diet effects, climate effects, and again, trying to get a holistic picture of what is happening to some of the animals in the Arctic, particularly the lower latitude ones. So right now I'm focused around the Hudson Bay, which is a big, most people will know what it is. It's a massive oceanic kind of system, but it's unique in the Arctic because it's quite low in latitude. When you get to the bottom of the Hudson Bay area, some of that is actually in Ontario, which most people don't think about, polar bears being in Ontario, but we have quite a
Are there really? There's polar bears in Ontario?
Yeah, the southern Hudson Bay polar bear population is in northern Ontario.
Holy shit!
Technically, they overlap into Nunavut. So the Nunavut government also takes an active part in managing them, but they also are part of Ontario. So we have a lot of land in Canada, and we cover a lot of space, and we have pretty much the entire Arctic region. So
holy fuck!
There's a lot of work.
It's a lot of fucking travel.
A lot of work has to be done in Canada, otherwise it doesn't get done. Russia. I'm going to correct myself. Sorry. We have most of the Arctic area in North America. Russia has the other biggest chunk of it, obviously, but they don't also have a lot of money to do environmental research, and that's not really their priority. So a lot of the work we do here is translated across the globe.
Why has Canada made that a priority?
Again, I think it's just our approach to the way that we look at global agreements and things like that. We always take a big role, and because the Arctic is mostly ours,
it's yours, right?
We really it's part of the sovereignty arguments as well. Like obviously by doing a lot of work in the north, we also show our presence there. So back in the 40s and 50s, there was a lot of push from the Americans in Alaska. From the Russians in the north because of the Cold War and everything, and because and other stress factors. So we really want to establish ourselves as the Arctic nation that's doing something up there. And that's carried forward to today. But
and
again,
you do this for a living.
Yeah. So now, So this is my.
How does one do this for a living?
It's a good question.
Who employs you?
So right now, I work for the government of Canada. I am a postdoctoral fellow, which is a way of saying that I'm kind of a late stage intern. Is the last kind of way to do it. So I'm qualified to be a research scientist. I'm qualified to do the science that I do, but I don't have my own lab. I don't have my own space yet to work out of. So I still work with mentors who have that lab space, who have a little bit more expertise than me and more experience working in the field. Mm-hmm. So they're still teaching me things, but it's usually in a different manner. So now they're teaching me how to get funding. They're teaching me how to manage a lab, how to manage students, because you have to train PhD students and master's students and the people that are going to be the next generation of scientists. So a lot of my training now is not necessarily just about learning, how these contaminants behave in bears. It's about how to manage a lab and how to be a more effective scientist too. So.
Wow.
So a lot of the work is done through the government in Canada, and that's why we are able to do a lot of the things we do because we prioritized it. Funding for a lot of Alaskan research, for example, there is some money from the U.S. government, but a lot of it comes from different sources. So the academics at universities there get the money themselves, mm-hmm. and then they team with us often, and we do research over in Alaska. And the same thing kind of happens in Russia because sometimes we can get money to do research over there to compare with ours, even though it's not our country. So again, there's a lot of, a lot of disproportionate work that goes on, but it's okay because we're really trying to, again, cover off the Arctic as much as we can and do as much work as we can, not just for interest, but again, for the people that live up there too.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned to start the show that I'd been trying to get you on, and you told me off the air that you'd switched jobs. So are you working for a new employer, or you have a new assignment, or what's that looking like? Yeah.
So right now, again, I'm a frontline kind of researcher. Again, we get like polar bear fat, liver, muscle samples. We process them in the lab. I measure a lot of contaminants in them. I also measure things that tell me about what that polar bear has been eating. I can track back the age and again the diet of the animal, and then relate that to contaminant kind of concentrations on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. So again, I write papers. I participate to what we call the primary literature. So that's like, again, you're writing scientific journal articles that are going out there with the first reports of data. Mm-hmm. So we find a new contaminant in a polar bear, we get to write about it, and it becomes a journal article. The new job is will be more of an overseeing kind of position where I'm still heavily involved in a lot of the research in the Arctic. But it's not even really a management job. It'd still be an environmental science job, but it would mean that I'm working with all of the different researchers, studying everything from fish and plankton all the way up to polar bears across the entire Canadian Arctic, and helping them coordinate their work with the communities they work in, and then making sure that data is put into the databases where we can use it for bigger kind of approaches to the problems. So knowing, for example, like the one contaminant is building up in one small food chain around the Hudson Bay in polar bears is interesting. But we also want to know what the bigger picture of all the polar bears in Canada is. So this new job will kind of give me an opportunity to explore those bigger picture questions. But I will no longer be kind of the frontline scientist, again, like processing that liver sample or that fat sample in the lab. So yeah, it's a really cool opportunity, and it just so happens that, again, certain positions have opened up at the right time. It's more of a job that I thought of myself getting 10 years down the road, to be perfectly honest.
Lucky you, huh?
But yeah, no, it's an amazing opportunity, and it allows me to keep working with all the people that I want to work with, and affecting the communities and the animals and the things that matter most to me. So yeah, I'm really hopeful that it works out. It's not locked in place yet, so knock on wood. But we'll see. Regardless, there's lots of research to be done, but yeah, I could be switching over in the summertime.
That's dope. Dude, polar bears are fucking awesome.
They are, yeah. They're one of those animals that when people, and I've said this at many a talk before, when people see a picture of a polar bear, it doesn't matter if they're 2, they're 10, they're 16, they're 40, or they're 90. Most people's faces light up. You know, they're one of those animals, we call them charismatic megafauna.
Oh yeah.
They're just one of those animals that captures the public attention. So
it's because all those Pepsi commercials, or was it Coke? Coke?
It was all Coke.
Coke, there we go.
And again, they spread that false rumor that polar bears and penguins coexist, which a lot of people still actually think. And
they don't coexist?
Oh no, they're separated by the entire world. Yeah, penguins only exist in the southern hemisphere.
Is that right?
On Antarctica.
I had no fucking clue. See, here's the thing: like zoos, I mean, they probably say that on the fucking pictures, but I only see penguins in zoos, so I just assumed anywhere cold.
That's the thing. So in the Arctic, we do have several species of birds that are black and white patterned. The thick-billed murres are one of the species, and they're one of the things that I actually study right now. I'm looking at climate change effects in the murres, and whether or not that affects the contaminant trends over time. But they're awesome little birds because they have this black and white pattern, and they fly super well, but they also dive and swim like a penguin. Not quite as effectively as a penguin because they're not, the same evolutionary stage, but they dive and swim super well. So
it could be confused as a penguin.
Yeah, and again, they're just stark black and white. There's no other patterning on them at all.
What is it, a murre?
Thick-billed murre. Yeah, M-U-R-R-E.
Thick-billed. Oh, okay, I see it. Oh, that's not a fucking penguin.
No, but they're
yeah,
they're black and white little fish-eating birds. So they fill a similar niche, but there's no in the southern hemisphere in the Antarctic where the penguins live. There are leopard seals in the water that eat them, but there aren't a lot of land predators. But yeah, really, it's just that the penguins evolved in the southern hemisphere. And bears never made it to that continent before it separated. So there's no bears and penguins that coexist. But the Antarctic penguins do make it all the way up to the southern tip of South America.
Oh, really? Okay.
And the southern tip of Africa. So there are little populations there where at certain times of the year you can find penguins in
That's fucking strange too.
It's a long way to go. Yeah.
So fucking polar bears. You've seen these things up close and personal?
I've seen 2 polar bears in the field in real life.
Really? Aren't they fucking? Don't they just want to kill? Aren't they not hyper aggressive? I've heard they're just monsters. They want to eat. They see anything as prey. Is that right? Yeah. I mean, the thing is, they're the biggest thing out there, right. And they're very curious. Because the Arctic is devoid of food for them. Like their food source is the seals that they have to basically crunch the ice and pull them out of there. Yeah.
And every time they miss one, it costs them a lot of energy. And if they're a mother that has cubs, every time you miss a seal, that's one step closer to you dying before you can actually raise your young to, a reproductive age. So
that makes more sense.
There's a lot of cost in terms of what the polar bear's life is. So if there's a food source that's available, they'll tend to investigate it. You know what I mean? It's
you seen that video where the dude's in a cage or in a glass cage, and the polar bear comes up and is just trying to fucking rip that thing apart to get to him?
I'm not sure that I've seen that one, but I've seen several like things like that. But I don't think that they're inherently, again, looking for people. Obviously, that's not their food source. We don't have, just much like sharks that are looking for seals. Bears are looking for things that are rich in fat.
Yeah.
And although we're a bit chubby these days, we are not. We don't have like a 3-inch thick layer of blubber on the outside.
We're not the healthy fat they're looking for.
Well, and if you've ever seen, there's videos online that you can find of a polar bear stripping, like it'll grab a piece once it rips the flesh a bit, it'll grab a piece of blubber on a seal and it just strips the entire blubber layer off and leaves the carcass.
Really?
It's not worth their energy to digest the meat and the other parts of the seal because the fat just absorbs right into their system more or less. So again, if they can get seals, there's no issue with polar bears usually. If they're fat and healthy, you're much less likely to get attacked or investigated by them. Mm-hmm. There's been a increase of instances in Canada where again we have 2/3 of the world's polar bear population. So the Inuit people over here deal with way more bears than anywhere else in the world. And a couple of communities where they're used to dealing with bears, people have been killed in recent years.
Just by them investigating,
which is unusual. Well, again, usually the Inuit are pretty well aware where the bears are. They often have guns, especially if they're outside of the town. So it's unusual for them to get surprise attacked by an animal like that. But there's a lot of factors that are at play right now. And part of it, again, this is part of my frustration with studying polar bears, is that everybody always wants to blame everything on climate change. When you see a sick bear, a skinny bear, or whatever that happens in the news, everybody always automatically says, well, look at climate change, it's killing these animals. There was a National Geographic story.
Yeah, I remember that, where that fucking skinny-ass bear was walking around on like a floating piece of ice.
And if you followed that story at all, it was on land. It was on the shores. It was near Hudson Bay. Actually, no, it was near Baffin Bay, which is off of the shore of Baffin Island in the higher Arctic. So where that bear was filmed is actually one of the places that's not been hugely affected by climate change yet. Like, we know the ice conditions haven't changed massively there yet. And when they followed up on that story, they found that the Inuit in the area were like, that happens all the time. Like, something happened to that bear. And when polar bears can't feed, so they're very dependent on the ice in season. So when there's still land fast ice, so ice that's frozen to the shoreline, and they can get out there easily and hunt seals, they're at their fattest and healthiest. Once the ice starts to break up, if they haven't fed heavily during that period and they're not really beefed up, often there can be a period from, say, July until November or October when the ice starts to refreeze. Like, yeah, so they start to get that way. So if you look at that video again, even the pictures of that bear, and this is the first thing that I noticed when I saw it, is that it's dragging its one back leg. So it looks like it broke its leg at some point, probably before.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing that now. Yeah.
And the bears, more and more, especially in those areas, they've been scaling cliffs looking for food. So again, it's not that there isn't a shortage of food for them, but that bear may have had just some bad luck. And it slid down a cliff and smashed its leg. And then when it was supposed to be hunting seals, it couldn't get to them fast enough. So it thins out over that period when it's supposed to be fattening. So then it gets to that kind of catastrophic level in that video once the ice actually leaves. Because then they're depending on their fat stores.
Right.
So anyway, long story short, when they actually went into the Inuit villages nearby and asked them about that video, they were like, no, that bear was probably sick or broke its leg like it looks like in that video. So it couldn't hunt properly.
And it didn't help that a lot of that video was shot where there was no ice, which everyone just automatically assumed, well, the ice must have just fucking melted. Climate change. Oh my God. Save the polar bear.
Where, again, as the reality is, like, most polar bears live in a range where during some part of the summer, there's no ice and no snow around there.
Jeez, I didn't even realize fully until I not only listen to you but other people talking about that. Calm your, hold your horses a little bit on this.
Well,
don't overreact.
I really like the idea that we can use the polar bear as a charismatic species that draws attention to climate change, but it has to be for science, not for somebody's gut reaction. And again, the main thing with that video was the National Geographic people posted it with their opinion, and saying, "Look at the effects of climate change," I believe, or something in the title.
Mm-hmm.
When that's not the case, maybe that contributed, but really the fact is that bear looked sick to begin with, and it looked like it had a broken leg. So that was probably what caused that.
Yeah,
we have enough issues with bears that we can actually quantify with science. That we shouldn't be focusing on these passion kind of things. Again, and if you listen to the Inuit, they're seeing more bears around their communities, and they're seeing more bears in certain areas. So again, our scientific surveys and things might be somewhat accurate, but you also have to listen to the people that are actually there 12 months a year, all the time, because we only have a window that we see.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a very difficult thing to manage and deal with. But yeah, after that video came out, I spent a lot of time going on Twitter and like trying to diffuse people from being like, "This is climate change. This is this." No, maybe, but we don't know. So don't front it as that.
What are you seeing as far as climate change when in some of your studies So I guess the first off, the loaded question is, because this is a big now become a political thing, at least in the U.S. is climate change real? Is this global warming? Is that a real thing? What are you seeing?
I don't think that there's any question anymore. If you look at the people that study these things, again, we're at like 99%.
That's what I saw.
Now.
Yeah, not most. Other than a small fraction, most agree that at least global warming is a thing, right?
And again, it's the climate change factor that is, we've driven it off of what is a normal oscillation cycle. So again, there is obviously variation in the climate, right?
Sure.
And not just in the large scale climate measures, but there's also in the small scale, like even in Chicago or Ottawa recently, you've seen swings of 25, 30 degrees Celsius in like a day. So it depends what you're looking at. If we're looking at temperatures, air temperatures, water temperatures, if we're looking at ice extent, if we're looking at whatever the metric is, you have to be careful at how you're looking at it and how you're analyzing it, obviously. So when it comes to climate change and these kinds of things, these are usually based on the ice extent measurements and things like that from scientists that have been studying these things for decades. And you can't just find an average or like a mean or a median or whatever in a specific time and say, okay, that's what the temperature was or what the ice extent was here.
Right.
Like these guys use complex mathematical algorithms to average things over certain periods of time. So you can actually but you can reveal trends in the data. Regardless, if you look at the natural temperature cycles, for example, that have happened since the ice ages, or the natural ice cycles, we are well off those historical patterns now. And based on, again, ice cores and things like that, you can actually see some of this historical data. So now we're projecting into the future, which is where a lot of people get hitchy about the whole thing, right? But you work in business, like if you're deconvoluting economic trends, or you're like looking at long-term economic trends, you don't look at the day-to-day variation either. Again, you look at trends over the course of decades.
Right. You try to take a wider scope on things.
Yeah, exactly.
The fluctuation day to day, if you follow that, the fluctuation day to day is too much of a swing, and leads to wild overreactions.
Exactly, which I think is what we see a lot in climate science for the most part. Whereas when these much better mathematical scientists than I apply these algorithms that they developed over a very long period of time to kind of show the underlying trends to this variation. There's consistent increases in temperature and there's consistent decreases in sea ice overall throughout the Arctic. But if you're looking at localized areas, you can see very different trends. Like it's crazy, but it's the day-to-day variation that makes it complicated to analyze. But it's the day-to-day variation that's actually also the biggest concern for me, for example, because say one bad year with sea ice, where the ice breaks up 2 months earlier than it normally would, and freezes up a month later, that could cost a lot of polar bears their lives. so their population might drop in that year.
Are you noticing these things? Are these things popping up in your research?
These are still, again, longer term trend kind of things that are being investigated. But some of my colleagues, not myself so much, but there's guys that specifically look at the biological relationships of bears with sea ice. So again, looking at their fat thickness, their health, and their reproductive success is a big one in relation to that kind of thing. And they're seeing changes, but I'm not sure that there's necessarily anything concrete yet.
Reproductive success indicates that the bear is healthy and can produce, right? And that they're getting enough food because conditions allow for them to find food much easier.
Exactly.
Right.
So a lot of our colleagues actually over in Denmark do a lot of really interesting work correlating contaminant concentrations to like penile bone density in polar bears, for example. And they're
penile bone, nice.
Yeah, they actually have a bone down there because it's so cold. It's so cold that they can't get it going without
that. When you first said that, it just went over my head. I was like, oh, that's just another bone in the body. And then I went, oh, wait a minute, the penis bone. Yes, okay.
Right. But for example, they're finding like decreases in the penis bone density with increasing concentrations of certain contaminants.
Wait, they're finding that people in Denmark are finding this about polar bears?
Yeah, do
they have a population over there?
The Danish are responsible for the Greenland population for the most part.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Sorry, I didn't. Yeah, I should have specified that. So they are the holders of a lot of the other data in the Arctic because they do actually put some money into the Greenland.
Those fucking polar bears got over to Greenland? That's awesome. They're just hanging out on that big giant island?
Yeah, definitely. But again, in terms of the long-term kind of effects of climate change, we're hypothesizing now, but it's based on their body condition. Like again, the longer the sea ice is out, and before the freeze-up occurs, if there's a longer period of time, the bears get skinnier. And they look less healthy, and the females tend to lose more young and things like that. So, but now again, there's been these long-term data sets that are starting to come together, and now they're being put together with the temperature data. So in the next 5 years, I think we'll see a big explosion of a lot of these data that people have been working on for decades that are now kind of at the point where we can statistically show some of these things to be true. But for obvious reasons, people are very hesitant scientifically to, again, attribute things to climate change until we have strong data. Because then we end up in the same situation as everything else that's been happening, like I mentioned, with that National Geographic photo where, again, you're following your gut and you're looking at, a starving polar bear and you're emotional about it, but what you really want to do is show scientifically that there's change.
Science in general is supposed to be devoid of emotion. It's supposed to be the finding of facts, right?
This is true.
So,
again, I like to think that I'm driven by like a passion for the animals themselves and for and to do what I can to preserve the ecosystem as a whole. But I never walk into a study or an experiment necessarily with a predisposed idea as to what's going to happen. It's more important for lab science, like if I'm doing an actual experiment in a laboratory. Whereas in the field, I might have some idea, if bears in certain areas might be more exposed to a certain contaminant. You know what I mean? Like it's
right.
Bears that are closer to industrialized areas have higher concentrations of mercury. It's not a surprise, but again, you have to be careful the way you think about it and the way you present it.
Is it frustrating for you when you? I don't know if you see it up in Canada as much, but is it frustrating for you when you see politicians, for example, that clearly don't have a science background but are taking a anti-global warming stance purely based on politics rather than science?
It's one of the more frustrating parts of a lot of my internet reading in life right now, to be honest. Again, I work.
This shouldn't be a political debate. It's either it is or it isn't.
Exactly.
Or we don't know yet.
And that's exactly it, right? It's there are clear effects and there are some clear things that based on the models that we have and based on the data from the experts that we have, they're saying, again, for example, flooding is increasing in certain parts of the world and that is climate change related. There are ocean levels that are rising in certain parts of the world, and that is climate change related. We can see these things happening, yet politicians will go on TV and tell you that it's not happening. or that, we don't need to worry about it because they have another plan to deal with the pollution and whatever else. Like in Canada right now, there's a big debate over our carbon pricing.
Okay.
So there's a tax that they're putting on to big industries like oil industries and pretty much any large scale industry that would basically for the carbon dioxide that they are calculated to produce, they have to pay a certain amount into like a cap and trade kind of system. So they can buy more carbon credits, but it costs money that goes into climate change research and renewable energy research and things like that. So
so the more you in quotes kind of mess up the environment, the more you'll pay for people like you to study it.
Exactly. Well, exactly. And it also is an incentive for them to start
to stop
exploring other aspects of
You don't. That's the way to hurt a business is just drain them of money.
However, most businesses are in Canada, especially the oil, like big oil companies like Suncor, were quite supportive of a carbon tax, because it was creating opportunities for a different market to develop. Where if they were being very climate conscious and reducing their footprint, they could actually sell their credits to other people, and whatever. So it was a bit of a test system, but it was pretty much in full force. Now we have a bunch of other politicians that have come in Ontario, and they just canceled our contribution to it without any information. But they said, this is raising gas prices by 4 cents. This is raising this by 2 cents. So it's costing people of Ontario money. So we're going to back out of it. However, the federal government said, well, no, if you're not going to do it, we'll put that in place for you now. Anyway, so it's become this ridiculous thing, but it's back and forth between people that don't actually understand what they're talking about.
Which is frustrating for someone like you.
Because you want both sides of the argument to be defended by facts and science. But yeah, it's just, it always comes down to what's it going to cost the average family per year? Mm-hmm. Can we reduce that, or can we somehow convince them that it's not going to affect their lives? Whereas I don't know, again, a lot of people in my age range, so the average estimate was it'll be $760 a year if you're polluting a lot for a family in Canada. But the federal government will give you a rebate of $500. Mm-hmm. So all said and done, I would pay $260 a year to do better things for research in relation to renewable energy and the climate in Canada. And I'm okay with that.
Right.
Take my $260. Is that really all I have to pay to develop that? Great. But a lot of people do not feel that way, right? So
I feel like there's this constant push-pull between science and politicians, because politicians are here to make things better, in their opinion, right now.
Yes.
Whereas science just doesn't move that fast. Their answers don't come right now. And the answers might be, 20 years of doing something, 30 years. And for a politician, they're going to be, that's in America at least, that could be 3-4 times their career as a politician, as a major politician. So there's no benefit to them to look at the scientific way of viewing things.
It's absolutely true. And I think that's a huge problem, because
there's not a lot of scientists doing politics.
No, but I mean, again, there's probably a few reasons for that, but
yeah, but there's not a lot of science. I mean, the politicians don't have scientific background, so they're not coming at it from that viewer perspective.
No, exactly. And it's because the scientists would probably say things that would terrify a lot of the public, and then they would never get elected.
Exactly.
But I think the idea that we're fear-mongering kind of people is also a bit misconstrued, because I'm more looking to just, again, be factual about everything. It's not, the climate change issues are a bit terrifying when you look at the worst projections. Mm-hmm. But we should be focusing on the things they're saying we can achieve. There are goals in 20, 30 years that can prevent, though they think will prevent a lot of sea level rise and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. Like you said, there's such a huge divide between that 4-year term, or that 8-year term that a person might have. But see, in Canada, we don't have the limits on the prime ministership.
Okay.
So you could actually theoretically be elected indefinitely as the prime minister.
Well, that makes sense that your government funds the research that you're doing as much as it does.
That rarely happens, though.
Oh, really?
Well, because, I don't know. Again, it's the same thing in the States. There's such a black and white thing that the liberals always undo so much of what the conservatives do, that they spend, when the conservatives get in power, they spend so much of their time trying to redo what they already did.
Sure, yeah.
And vice versa. So we've just gotten caught up now, more or less, to what happened after the last conservative government left. And now we're due for another election in the fall.
Mm.
And if the liberals get voted out, that whole, like, everything that they've done scientifically is going to be undone very quickly.
Jeez.
In terms of environmental protections and things like that. And the conservative representative in Canada is actually very, wouldn't say he's Trumpian. Let's not go quite there. But he's definitely like anti-climate change, pro-nationalism, like, you know what I mean? Like the parallels are hard to ignore, and it's a bit strange. And if that happens, my new job will probably be safe, but a lot of people I know will not be safe in that respect. So,
well, let's not focus too much on the negative.
No.
What are you finding up in some of your research? What are some cool things you're finding? What's some interesting things that you're finding up there?
Well, I think one of the most encouraging things about polar bears in particular is that they are highly adaptive animals. So a lot of the contaminants that we find in their food sources, ring seals, can accumulate to quite high levels. But in the bears, we see them.
What kind of
off.
contaminants are you finding?
Well, there's a whole. We look at everything that we would think would be a concern. So we look at flame retardants, so things that are in your clothing. There's a lot of news about BPA, for example, bisphenol A, which is like a plasticizer, flame retardant, an endocrine disruptor, but it's not so much of a concern. But chemicals similar to that, again, we put into any material to stop them from becoming very flammable. And we like to make a lot of materials out of petroleum chemicals, right? Anything synthetic has some kind of element of petroleum, which makes them super flammable. So we add flame retardants to them that basically stop the fire from spreading in these materials. And those are some of the most abundant chemicals that we find in the Arctic, not just in polar bears, in birds and seals and fish.
Why are you finding what people are just discarding their?
Yeah, well, think about
clothing,
dump, right? The clothing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
It's not just clothing. It's electronics. They're a huge source.
Well, yeah.
So when you see a circuit board, when a fire or a spark happens on a circuit board, it fizzles out like immediately. It's because there's a high concentration of flame retardants in that.
Oh, no kidding! I had no fucking clue.
There's a reason, again, like it's an electrical system, so fire should spread, but they need to make sure that it doesn't. So they add, again, these fire quenching chemicals to these formulas, and so even in the outer hull of your computer, there's a bunch of plasticizers and flame retardants, and then the circuit boards themselves, and so yeah, electronics, clothing, carpets, upholsteries, curtains, like everything.
Everything, yeah.
Produces these.
I guess
things.
That makes sense because the home builders of today don't want your house to go up in flames as quick as it could without that stuff.
No, exactly, and it's interesting because you don't necessarily think that the Arctic would be an abundant source of these things, but the people up there also wear fleeces. They have computers, so now there's local sources up there. Whereas we always assume that most of the contamination comes from down here, and it does. Like there's been a lot of studies in the early '90s that showed, even though things are getting into the waterways around here in parts per like quadrillion or parts per femtillion, which is almost ridiculous to even think about, like 10 to the negative 15th, like concentrations.
Those are sizes you can't even fathom.
They'll get into the Arctic Ocean and then they'll build up in the animals up there because a lot of these chemicals build up in fat.
Oh, shit. Okay.
And so Arctic animals, even the fish in the Arctic, have a higher fat content because they use the fats to combat the cold and keep their cell membranes fluid. And there's a lot of reasons. Better energy source, et cetera, et cetera. But because they store fat even in the fish and then they store blubber in the mammals, they're more susceptible to accumulating these contaminants, right? And so, yeah, years ago, they found that some of the industrial chemicals from the south were actually higher in Arctic ladies' breast milk than in a place right beside where they were making the chemicals.
Wow.
Because the Arctic people were eating the marine mammals that had a higher...
Oh, yes. Okay, that makes sense.
That magnified a higher concentration of these contaminants and things. Like it's... yeah, so we look for, again, some of these historical chemicals, again, like the things that we know build up, like the flame retardants and PCBs, they're called, and other organochlorine pesticides like DDT, which most people are familiar with. But we also look for brand new chemicals in the bears, things that might not necessarily be a concern yet. And most of those new chemicals that we look for, the polar bears seem to break down and get rid of because we find them in seals and we find them in fish. But by the time we look for them in bears,
they're not there anymore.
They seem to be gone. So that is a good news story. It means that some of the chemical engineers and people that are developing these chemicals have been learning from historical lessons in terms of what accumulates and what doesn't. And in some cases, these companies actually even hire scientists ahead of time nowadays and will say, we want to use this chemical to be a plasticizer or a flame retardant in a certain material. Can you tell us whether or not you think this will be an issue? So they'll allow the scientists to get the chemical, run experiments on it, and test it. So some of the new classes of flame retardants, things that are replacing these really harmful chemicals, seem to be getting broken down and gotten rid of by the polar bears, which is a good sign because that means we might be able to do that as well.
What do you mean, like we as in people can get rid of it?
Humans, yeah.
Yeah.
Although, again, it's a different system. Obviously, a bear and a human are quite different, but we often look at either polar bears or seals or high-level predators as an example as to what might happen in the humans in the Arctic. So, yeah, in some cases, it seems like the bears are able to get rid of some of these chemicals and survive.
Are there any other concerns that you're finding in polar bears of contaminants?
Yeah, the main contaminants have been the same for the last 20 years, and that's that's the scary thing. Like PCBs, they're
PCBs.
So PCBs used to be used in dielectric fluids. So big transformers, again, big electrical systems that you would see on the side of the highway, the big transformers and stuff like that.
Sure.
They would be filled with PCB containing fluids, so that if there was a fire or a spark, the PCB would essentially help to, again, extinguish that fire before it became a huge issue. But they were banned in the late 70s, and we still find them in the highest concentrations in the animals throughout the Arctic because they were made to be persistent and not break down.
And what is it doing to the bear?
So some of them mimic hormones, so they can bind into receptors that would cause a hormone response, which is not good because usually it's thyroid hormones, and your thyroid regulates most of the systems in your body to some degree. So if something looks like a thyroid hormone and is binding to the thyroid receptor, your body thinks there's more thyroid hormone there than there is, and it can, again, just affect the regulation of pretty much everything in the body, and it can lead to cancers and all kinds of other issues. And then the other contaminants bind to sex hormone receptors. So things that interfere with either testosterone or estrogen.
Yeah, those would be important for a bear.
It would be important.
And anyone else, really.
And any organism, really, that's developing, you need to have the right hormone response kind of cascade that happens, right? So yeah, for the most part, what we see with a lot of these contaminants in the long term is that they seem to interfere, again, with development through the endocrine system, so they have the thyroid system and things like that, or they interfere with the sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen. And then in some cases, like mercury, they're directly toxic to the neurological system. But that's pretty rare. You're not gonna, a polar bear or an animal in the Arctic is not gonna eat something that is so highly contaminated with a pesticide, for example, that it's going to go into neurological shock because the pesticide's at a low concentration. It's more the long-term effects that we're looking for.
I see. So there's really, I mean, you've been seeing this for 20 years, but there's not enough. Is there not enough data to make any conclusions yet, or is it still an ongoing thing that's going to be going for a while?
Well, the thing is right now, like I said, one of my projects right now, we're looking at kind of holistic effects of all the contaminants in the bear. Normally what we do is look at one contaminant and its effect on a certain enzyme, or one thing and its effect on the sex hormone concentration. But what I'm trying to do is look at the effects of all 295 contaminants that we measure at once, and that might give us some insight, but it's still an early stage. Most of what we can do right now, because polar bears, we don't have a lot of captive polar bears that we can experiment on, like mice. So we don't necessarily know.
I think the public would go crazy if we had captive polar bears like we did mice and experimented on them.
Absolutely. When I first started one of the projects I'm working on now, I actually suggested just feeding the polar bears 2 different diets. Like one was strongly seal meat and one that was all fish. And I got denied. Like there was no way that they would let me do that. Immediately. Because you cannot mess with captive animals.
Yeah, don't fuck with the polar bears especially.
But yeah, so again, like I said, some of my colleagues over in Denmark have actually been showing correlations. Again, you're familiar with business, correlation.
Yep.
It's just 2 things that tend to increase together. It doesn't necessarily mean
causation
causing the other.
Right.
But again, they're finding pretty consistent relationships of like decreased penile bone density with certain contaminants.
Oh, yeah.
Which again means that the males are going to be less successful in their reproductive efforts. But
which will lead to a decreased population, obviously,
in the long run. But those kind of long-term projections are difficult to do.
Okay.
They just recently did one with the killer whale populations across the world.
You find those up in the Arctic as well?
Well, they're getting higher and higher into the Arctic now.
Okay.
They used to venture into the Arctic regions, but relatively rarely, I guess. But with the warming oceans, they seem to be moving north more and more. And killer whales are one of the more terrifying things in the ocean for other animals in the ocean.
Yeah, they're monsters.
They'll eat almost anything, and they're smart, and they're pod hunters. So they work as a group. Like, again, there's a lot of things about them that make them super effective.
Those videos you see of them just destroying white sharks are just insane.
Yeah, there's a whole population of them that are shark hunters.
Yeah,
because they figured out that, again, shark liver is mostly fat. So if they just rip the shark open and eat his liver and leave the rest of the carcass, it's almost like a seal.
Jeez.
But yeah, the orcas.
Anyone that's seen Free Willy is just thinking to themselves, I had no fucking clue that these animals were just these terrors in the ocean.
Well, and again, they're interesting because they can get quite like acclimated to people being around them. So there are populations where you were near Vancouver. That are
shout out to Vancouver, great city.
That are quite used to having people around them in boats.
Do they ever attack humans? Or is it one of those things where humans provide no nutritional value to them and they're not a threat?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. Okay. The Inuit are terrified of them. Well, actually, I'm going to recant that already. But the Inuit have a healthy fear of them.
Okay.
Because they used to go out and hunt seals in kayaks. And when you're in a kayak and a killer whale surfaces somewhere near you, it's over. A little bit terrifying, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, you're going to get flip capsized real quick if that whale hits the kayak.
Exactly. So there's one of the few animals that I've seen a healthy kind of fear of in the Arctic were killer whales. But yeah, again, they didn't encounter them that much, and they don't tend to range that far north. But they're getting further and further north now. Anyway, a friend of mine and some other colleagues of mine recently published a paper where they found that the PCB burden and some of the other pesticide burdens in these killer whale populations across the planet are some of the highest that we've ever seen, and that they predicted that, I think I should know this number, but they predicted that a small subset of these populations will actually collapse and disappear completely over the course of the next 50 years. Or 100 years based on these data. And that's a ballsy thing to do as scientists, because, projecting your data from concentrations in individuals in the population out to the entire population is risky. But I think there needs to be more of that kind of happening in science, because we're all very conservative and we don't want to say too much. You know what I mean? Like, it's like,
right.
Yeah, the concentrations in these polar bear populations are very high, and maybe it's having an effect, but we just need 10 more years of data, and in some cases that may not be the right approach. You know what I mean? We should be more conservative in terms of what we're exposing them to. So I don't know. I was quite proud of my colleagues for
going out on a limb and doing something like that
and saying something like that. And if we continue on these same paths, then like a certain number of these killer whale populations are going to die. And in a lot of cases, that'll change the dynamic of the oceans greatly. Killer whales are, again, very unique because there's some of them that stay in one area and then some of them that range across continents. Mm-hmm. They've evolved to fill these different niches. And they're the top predator, so nobody really knows, what's going to happen if that actually comes to be. So again, I think right now we're at a point scientifically where we have really cool tools to predict future outcomes, but we still have to be scientific about it.
Right, that's the balance.
And be careful. But there's no harm in saying,
this is what could happen, worst case scenario.
In a worst case scenario, exactly. In a risk assessment kind of approach, there are degrees that you can approach and say worst case, best case.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
So when you're doing your are you always on the road or?
No, to be honest, in the last little while, I've been mostly based in Ottawa.
Okay, so stuff's coming to you.
Yeah. Even a lot of the lab work is done for me right now. We have technicians that do most of the processing and good relationships with people in the north that are doing a lot of the collections. So I've been a computer jockey for a while, which is weird.
Didn't you mention you've lived or been with the Inuit?
I never lived for an extended period of time in the north, but I've been up for a couple weeks at a time by myself.
Okay. Where north is that?
So I've been to a place called Joe Haven, which is near the coast of Nunavut. It's at the 65th parallel or so. But my main place of work was always Resolute Bay. That's at the 75th parallel on Cornwallis Island. It's this tiny little village of 200 people, faces south. Then I've also been to Pangerton, which is one of the most beautiful places in the Arctic on the east coast of Baffin Island. So Pangerton is cut into a fjord that bottoms out at a park called Ayuatuk National Park, which means the land that never melts. It's a glacial park. It's a lake that has 3 different glaciers that feed into it.
How do you spell Pangerton?
Pangnirtung.
Oh, I see. Okay. Googling this stuff as you speak. So
no, continue. Please. That's cool. But yeah, Pang's again one of the most.
Oh, that's fucking beautiful.
Scenic places I've ever been to in the Arctic. Resolute is the place that has my heart, but it's mostly flat.
Pangerton's definitely got the views.
Oh, definitely, and that's where I saw my first Greenland shark as well.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
those things are fucking weird looking, aren't they?
They are very weird looking, and we thought they were much rarer than they actually are. But yeah, they're blind because they live below the light penetration level.
Sure.
They have moss growing on the outside of them, or not moss, sorry, algae growing on the outside of them.
They look like zombie sharks.
That's actually the best description I've ever heard.
It looks like the fucking Walking Dead shark.
Totally. That's a perfect description.
I try, man.
But yeah, so one of my friends that works out of the University of Windsor, he recently found out that they might be up to 500 or 600 years old.
Yeah, I'm seeing one right now. One picture from this is News Nation. 512-year-old Greenland shark measuring 18 feet.
Yep.
Is it the world's oldest living vertebrate? Holy fuck! How is this possible that they're living that long?
Because they live in the deep ocean. Their metabolism is super, super slow. I think I told you, we pulled one out of the ocean at one point because we were fishing for a halibut, Greenland halibut, on a long line. So they sit at 1,000 meters down in the ocean. But as we were pulling the line up, there was a shark on it, and it was a 10-foot shark. But it did not put up any fight. It was already wrapped in a line, and its gills were damaged, so it was going to die regardless. So our Inuit guide said, "Well, we'll sacrifice this one for samples." But it put up no fight. I just don't think they have a huge amount of energy because they're cold water sharks.
What's their diet? How are they hunting then?
So I don't think they hunt. I think
they're scavenging.
They're large scale scavengers. So whatever falls to the ocean floor, they eat. And actually, if you look at their teeth, it's interesting because their top teeth are somewhat pointed.
Yep.
And then their bottom teeth are actually curved over. So it looks like the edge of like a serrated bread knife. They don't look like pointed shark teeth.
I see that, yeah.
So it's more of something that would be used to like slice off chunks.
Yeah, just bite off chunks instead of hold on and grip.
And tear.
Yeah.
Like a great white or something, right?
Right.
So the prevailing theory is that, they eat a lot of seal, but usually seals that have already died and sunk to the bottom. But yeah, anyway, they're fascinating animals and just yeah. Again, like I said, my friends have just recently found out that they might live to be like centuries old. So
Jesus Christ. Next time we need a history lesson, we need to pull up a fucking Greenland shark and find a way to communicate with them.
Well, they're trying to figure out now too, because if they've been alive that long, they might have traces of not just contaminants, but also like other useful information in their tissues.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is because they're sharks, they don't have bone, right?
Right.
And bone is often where you can see these kind of long-term laydowns of contaminants, for example, or other factors. But they're all cartilage, and so there may not be these long-term records in those animals that we can look at. It's too bad,
right.
But it's the same reason we couldn't age them traditionally, because normally you would take a chunk of the vertebra from behind the head of the shark, and they can count the rings in the cartilage like a tree, and that would tell you how old the shark is. But when we did that with the Greenland shark, I was there when Bailey McMeans was the scientist I was working with. She pulled out this vertebra, and the middle of it just kind of fell out.
Oh my God.
Because it was jelly. So you can't age them normally. So they figured out a way to use the radiation from the atomic bomb blast in the 40s to track back.
Fuck.
To track back the age.
Science is crazy.
You can do some cool shit if you know what you're doing.
Right? Holy fuck.
But that's, again, I worked with some of those students and those people up in the north, and
this was in Pangerton?
That was in Pang, yeah.
Pang. So you were around the Inuit people? I guess they're just accustomed to normal life. They seem normal, like normal as in what we would assume is normal.
It's hard to describe the Inuit.
Yeah, how describe it?
So the Inuit folks are some of the most welcoming people I've ever met, but you have to be open-minded and willing to accept that their life is much different than yours. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like, they see so much ignorance and read so much ignorance, and they've been through so much shit over the years. Not just the Inuit, but the First Nations, like the southern indigenous people in Canada and in the U.S. as well, that they have a healthy degree of distrust a lot of the time, right? And they have a high demand for scientists to come into the community because we want to know what's going on with the environment. But the main reason, for example, again, one of the organizations I work for was established was to look at concentrations of contaminants in Inuit food to make sure their food is safe. So there's always that spin of you have to make sure that you're doing something not just for the science and not just for your purposes, but it's got to be for the community too. Mm-hmm. And they can sniff out somebody who's there for their own purposes and has no interest in them really quickly. And they really do not appreciate it. They'll take your money and they'll help you do what you need to do if it's been approved by their government. But they really want to see the benefits to their communities.
Who governs the Inuit?
The Nunavut government. So back in the 90s, when we established this territory as Nunavut across Canada, they got their own government essentially. So they function as part of the government of Canada. But the land claims agreements mean that they have ownership over the land. So I don't need to ask the government of Canada for permission to go and do my sampling in Resolute Bay, but I have to get approval from the community, Hunters and Trappers Association. Then they take that to a board that represents their region. It has to be approved there, and then at some level it has to be approved by the greater government as well. So they really, and increasingly so now, because they're more economically independent and things, they are looking to make sure that the science that's going on there is not harming the environment, for one thing, because surprisingly a lot of people go up there and leave all their crap there and do research and then fuck off. And it's
those Those are fucking losers.
Yeah, I totally agree, but it's also, not that uncommon,
Really?
or it wasn't back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, anyway, again, I find the Inuit to be refreshing and amazing people because I like the outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a hunter, but my family's always been hunters, and I threw myself into it. Like I've dissected a seal from top to bottom, several. I don't shy away from the kind of gorier aspects of what they do, because it's their way of life. And what
does their diet consist of?
Depends where you are. In the high Arctic, like in Resolute Bay, they're still, well, actually in a lot of the Arctic, they're still dependent on some level of country food, they call it, or traditional food.
Mm-hmm.
So that's caught food on the land. So you have seals, you have fish, seabirds like ducks. They go collect seabird eggs as well. They also eat like berries. Certain lichens are used as herbs. Like there's all kinds of different foods, but largely it's seal, caribou, fish, and then some other local fruits and stuff. But
have you had seal?
Oh yeah, I love seal meat actually, and it's now something that I can't get, so I fucking crave it.
What would you equate it to? What's it taste like?
My first assessment was that it's kind of like fishy duck, and with a bit of like a rabbity texture to it in some parts. It's definitely, I mean, the animal's built very differently,
right.
but the basic parts of it are the same. But on my first time eating, usually they braise the shit out of it, so they'll put it in a pot of water and just cook it for, I don't know, a couple hours until it's tender, and then they serve it with. Often the only times I've ever had it, it's been served with powdered mashed potatoes, mixed into whipped mashed potatoes, and then blue Kool-Aid. As
blue
juice.
Kool-Aid's a nice touch.
Yeah, well, the booze is hard to come by up there and very expensive. So, and a lot of the Inuit communities have actually banned alcohol. So,
oh, no kidding.
You can still get it, but you can't drink in public. You can't be drunk in public. You have to special order it. It's a big deal.
I mean, the common conception of Inuits is that they all live in igloos. I'm looking at pictures of Resolute Bay, and
no, they have nice little houses.
Yeah, they have nice little houses. This is just normal urban, or as urban as it gets up there.
But the seal meat is really interesting again because it's, when you look at it, it's like a deep maroon color, like a red like you've never seen. Like it's very unique, and they braise it. And so I was eating one of my first pieces, and I was like, "Oh, the rib is really good." And my friend was like, "No, that's the flipper." But yeah, it's probably pretty good. And I was like, "Oh shit, yeah, it's the same shape, I guess." But yeah, no, if it's braised properly, the gravy for it's really nice. But we discovered the hard way that our metabolism doesn't really deal with the seal meat the same way theirs does.
You mean as the Inuit?
Yeah. So my Inuit friend, as we were helping ourselves to a second portion, he was like, "You guys can have all you want." He's like, "But you white guys should be careful. It'll make you hot." And my friend that was with me on that trip, he was like the field expert. So he wasn't a scientist per se. He looked at me with like, "Is this guy telling the truth?" And I was like, "No, I don't think so. I think we'll be fine." And turns out, no, we were not fine. We ate another whole like plate full of seal meat. Hung out with my friend for a little bit, and then we were flying out a couple days later, and we were walking back to our hotel. And as we're walking back, I was like, I can't stop sweating. And like I had my parka off, and I was like just carrying it. And my friend was like, "I don't feel good. I'm like, what's happening here?" "You said we'd be fine, scientist." Yeah. So turns out again, the seal blubber and the seal meat is rich in in very short chain fatty acids.
Mm-hmm.
And those super short chain fatty acids get shunted into your metabolic cycle faster than some carbohydrates and faster than some proteins do. So your body will just process those, and fat creates 3 times as much energy as protein or carbohydrate. So when you're burning up that fat, it's creating that much more energy on top of what you're normally creating.
Up.
So you literally heat up. Like we went back to the hotel room, and I was laying there with the window open. And my boxer shorts just like laying in the bed praying that I didn't die because I thought I was just going to overheat to death. And I did. There's no research that I could find on this. It was just like basic nutritional.
Was it so for the Inuit? Is it just because they've been eating it so long that they're accustomed to it, or they don't eat as much as you do? They know to ration a little bit.
I think it's both. He was much more conservative on as much he ate, but they also are much more conservative dieters than we are in general, right? Like
how so?
Well, I think we have that typical North American like abundance of food kind of mentality.
Sure. Okay, I know what you're saying.
They are much more conservative up north in that they'll eat enough that they're full, but they'll never, that I've seen, overindulge. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's conservative. You need to save food for the next meal and the next month and the whatever else, right? So
yeah, they don't eat till they're full, like we probably all do.
Exactly.
Sometimes I eat till I'm uncomfortably full.
Yeah, exactly, and you know that you did something wrong, right?
Right. Oh yeah.
But that's it. So that since like the 80s, I guess in the 70s, they've had much more access to like processed crap and foods up north, and not surprisingly, their rates of diabetes have gone like through the roof. The rates of heart disease and shit have gone through the roof. One of my best friends in Resolute Bay, Peter Amarulik, he's only 55 now actually, and he had a triple bypass when he was in his early 40s.
Holy shit! And he's an Inuit person.
Yeah, and somehow he made it from fucking Resolute.
What do you call it? Inuit? Like
Inuit? Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, it depends. In certain parts of Canada, they call it Inuit. Okay, but Inuit is how I've always pronounced it.
Got it. I didn't know if there was I don't call you a Canada person. I call you a Canadian.
No. So yeah. So Nunavut is like the land of the people, is what the translation is.
Gotcha.
And Inuit means people of the land, basically.
Okay.
So it was their way of shirking Eskimo, which in technical translation means eater of raw meat, I believe. So they always felt that it gave them an imagery of savagery, which is not what they want to portray.
So Inuit does not equal Eskimo?
Well, they used to be called Eskimos.
Used to be. Oh, okay, I got it. I see what you're saying.
But when they reclaimed their land as Nunavut, they renamed their people as the Inuit. But yeah, anyway, regardless, like I said, the seal meat has always been kind of prized and whatnot. But once I had the seal meat, when you're out on the land and you're working in the snow and it's cold, if you're dissecting a seal and you get cold, they'll literally will just toss you a small chunk of raw seal meat. You eat the chunk of raw seal meat and you feel your body literally go, whoo, and you feel like a rush of energy. Yeah. It's like within 5 minutes, you literally feel
raw seal meat. What's that taste like? Just fat?
Well, no. Again, it's a chunk of meat, not the blubber.
Oh yeah, that's right. You're right. Stupid me. I'm a stupid chimp, so I have no idea.
No, it's all good, man. It's fine. It's not the beluga. They actually chew on the muktuk, like the fat in the skin, but not so much in the seal.
Why is that? Why do they do that with the beluga?
I don't know. Because I guess the taste to the Inuit is good. I've tried muktuk before and I did not like it.
No.
I'll do it as a polite gesture if I'm offered, but it's not tasty. Seal meat, caribou meat, any fish that they make up there, I'll eat. Raw. Just not the
muktuk.
Yeah, no, beluga meat was not my liking, and narwhal meat.
Whale meat, neither.
Muktuk. No, I don't know. I don't know what it was. Just I don't know. It's hard to, again. I don't think I can.
I'm curious to try all of this. I don't know if I'll ever make it up there, but I am curious to try.
Seal meat is something that I'm trying actually to get a friend of mine to send me south in a cooler with some samples for us.
Right.
So that I can cook some for my buddies.
Just to show them.
At our annual Man's Weekend this year, yeah. But I think now I know enough that I can cook it without giving everybody the shits. So.
There you go. I've always been interested in science. As a kid, I wanted to be a scientist. No joke.
In what kind of aspect? Like what?
I had no idea. I just wanted to be a scientist because I loved animals and I loved studying things. Mm-hmm. And then I got into school and realized this is much more complicated and much more applied than I want to in school. So now I'm just going to do something easier. But was this something you always wanted to do? Were you just like, was this always your calling? Like, I want to study science.
Yeah, in some ways, I guess. When I was a little guy, I spent a lot of time outside, and I was always super interested in nature and asking questions about nature. And like I've told you guys before, my parents were super young when I was born. My mom was only 15 and my dad was 16. So
yeah, that's right. That's crazy young.
So we didn't have a lot of money, and my grandmother helped raise me. So when we needed to do something, we just went outside. And so it was a creek that I used to go splash around in. And I have old sketchbooks that, there are drawings of like the little crayfish and stuff that I used to find. And often it got to the point where I was asking questions my granny couldn't answer. So we'd go to the library and figure out what those things were or what this was. So I guess that was the beginnings of it. But to be honest, when I was in like my early teen years, I wanted to be an artist more than anything. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to be a comic book artist, and most of my sketchbooks are filled with Wolverine, Spider-Man, Deadpool drawings, and whatever else. And through high school, that was kind of where I was leaning for the most part. And then I figured out that with math, I could be good at business. So I also kind of veered off into that path a little bit in high school just to figure out my life. But then I realized that I wasn't creative enough to be a successful artist. Mm-hmm. I could copy people's stuff, but I was not going to be, the next Jim Lee.
Sure, yeah. You weren't inventing superheroes with your pen or pencil.
Exactly. Maybe I was going to be an inker who made $25 a page, which was not going to do it for me.
That's no way to live.
And then the business thing, like, again, I took a few business courses and it just didn't appeal to me. And at the same time, I was taking, 08, so grade 13 we had at the time, but senior level chemistry and biology. And those two teachers, like, basically came to me together and said, you should go to university to do something in this field.
So they were the ones. That was the influence.
Well, they were like, you're good at this. You don't seem to acknowledge that, but like, you maybe think about this as a job. And up until that point, I hadn't really considered that I could go do the thing that I wanted to do when I was 5 and be a marine biologist, and do something in that area. And when I actually considered it, most of the stuff that I watched on Discovery was all ocean related. Everything that I was actually passionate about was ocean related. I just was in denial in some way, I guess, or I didn't realize that could be a job.
So you consider yourself now a marine biologist as well?
Well, my undergrad degree was in marine biology. So my bachelor of science is marine and freshwater biology, and I specialized in physiology and in biochemistry. So just looking at how animals work and then how they adapt to different conditions. Mm-hmm. And then I finished my bachelor's, and I don't know, I applied to a bunch of government jobs that didn't come through right away. So like a cocky 23-year-old, I got fed up and was working in the restaurant industry. Had a really good time working in the restaurant industry for a few years, but got to a management job where I realized that also was not what I wanted to do, and that I was missing my passion, like that I wanted to do something that challenged me. And to be honest, it was actually a weekend in Chicago.
Hey,
with a friend of mine that I went and did my undergraduate with, that I've known since we were 10. And he's like, after many...
You were swimming in Lake Michigan and went, there's no fucking animals in here that are any cool. I want to study some cool animals. Let's go.
We were supposed to go to the beach, but we didn't make it because I was too hungover. But no, but he, on the one night after many beers and whatever else, he sat me down and he was like, I went to university with you. I watched you kill yourself to be a scientist. And now you're managing a restaurant that you don't really like and doing things that you don't care about. It's like, what the fuck happened?
And that was your come to Jesus moment?
That was my come to Jesus moment. Like, very shortly thereafter, I decided, fuck it. And I quit my job and got back into school. And then here I am. So it's, I followed the right path. It took me a little bit of time to find the right person to go back to school with. But I went back to get my PhD when I was 28. I was older.
How long did it take you to get the PhD?
Let's not talk about that. No, it took me,
all that matters is you got it, right?
No, it took me 7.5 years. Okay. So yeah, I finished around 35. It should have been shorter, but I got whatever. There was a lot of life things that happened, but also I got sidetracked into some projects on the side that meant a lot to me. So yeah, I didn't speed to the finish, but I definitely got there, and it was well worth the ride. But it was a long one.
You mentioned marine biology. Is it so? Random question here. Is it true? Is it the sperm whales that can dive deep into the fucking ocean and they fight those giant squid?
Yeah. So I don't know if that's been confirmed definitively or not, but the sperm whales definitely can get down into like the trenches.
Yeah, how the fuck does that happen?
They collapse their lungs, and like their entire body system basically like they allow it to collapse as they go down into the pressure of the ocean.
Oh fuck!
So they have like they have joints between certain parts of their bones and their ribs and stuff like that, so that everything crunches in.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they get down there, and because they've expelled all the oxygen from their bodies, they don't need to worry about the bends coming up because that's only gas trapped in your system, right?
Right.
But yeah, and some of the wounds on the sperm whale head, they think the only thing that could possibly have caused them would be giant squid. So yeah, if you go onto YouTube, I believe there's like animatics of sperm whales fighting giant squid.
Yeah, I've seen that stuff. Well, they've proven, there's been videos I saw on Discovery that giant squid are a real thing. They've caught video of them.
Oh no, they've known giant squid, and well, I think there's two different species or two different morphotypes. Like there's the somewhat giant squid that's in the like the middle ocean, and there's the giant squid, and it's they're huge, and they pulled them up. They're no joke. They've definitely ruled the oceans before there were mammals, I'm sure.
The giant squid, you think so?
They're in my invertebrate zoology class. They were like touted as pretty much the perfect predator, like in terms of the way that they hunt. Their eye is actually better than ours in a lot of ways.
Oh, no kidding!
Because the way that our eye translates images is that it has the flip. Like the image is projected onto our retina upside down, and then our optic nerve actually flips the image. Whereas in squid, it's projected directly. So in some ways, their vision is actually better than ours, and their eye works in a very similar way. They have the jet propulsion mechanism, so they can actually like shoot themselves at things. Their beak is like super resilient. Anyway, they were again viewed as one of the more effective and voracious predators, I believe, of the prehistoric oceans.
No kidding. Yeah, I mean, giant squid are the stuff of. I love all that shit. When they released that video where they caught a giant squid on camera in the wild, I was like, "Fuck yeah, that's dope."
and they lay it out on the table, right? Like, is that the one here?
No, there was one where they catch it on video and they catch it for a brief couple seconds, and then
like swimming.
And then it jets away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but it was one of the. I believe it was one of the first videos. I think it was on Discovery Channel. It was one of the first videos of one alive in not caught or anything, just a natural occurring squid.
Yeah, and that's rare. Like catching stuff from the deep ocean and getting it to the surface intact is difficult. Right? Like some of the fish explode. Again, a lot of the things with the pressure change. Like,
is that right? Holy fuck!
Don't make it. Yeah.
That's a tough way to go.
The pressure explosion, I mean, I would picture it being probably the worst. Besides being eaten, like you just kind of slowly expand till you explode. Yeah, that does suck.
So, what are you primarily studying up there? Besides, it's bears, but it's everything, right?
Yeah, again, right now I focus on the bears, caribou, and seabirds. But I have a hand in research with bears, seabirds, seals, all kinds of fish. And yeah, not so many of the obscure animals like the wolverines and stuff like that. But most of the major things that are important to the Inuit, we have some kind of hand in. And the birds are actually something that was never my interest or my forte when I was younger. Mm-hmm. But birds are amazing creatures, and they cover such amazing distances with their migrations that we're seeing really interesting and different trends in birds than we see in the mammals. And yeah, I've gained a new appreciation. I wish I'd learned more about birds when I was in an undergrad degree.
I'm not a big bird guy either.
Well, yeah, they seem kind of they're unemotional, they're cut and dry kind of animals, but I don't know. Again, their behaviors and the way that the way that they've evolved is fascinating.
I've always been more of a, just in general, an predator liking person. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily birds. Obviously, there's bird predators, but bears, lions, tigers, sharks, whales, squid.
So anything that could. Sorry.
Anything that can kill you.
Well, were you a fan of sharks when you were young, or were you afraid of sharks?
Yeah. Fan. Shark Week. Oh my God. All day. Great whites, tigers, bull sharks, hammerheads. Let's go. All day with sharks.
Yeah, me too. I mean, that was probably my first real love in the ocean. Again, when around that period I told you about, when I was kicking around things in a stream and kind of learning that I like science. When I was 4 or 5, was my dad will tell you the story where he, again, went to the library and he got me every Jacques Cousteau documentary he could, just to shut me up and keep me busy for a while. And he was like, okay, here's 14 hours of footage.
I think my dad did the same exact thing. He bought me something from Discovery Channel where it was, I remember, maybe 10 to 15 tapes, VHS tapes about sharks. And it was just one after the other. Put this one in, watch it. All right, watch the next one. Just shut up about sharks and just watch this. I just remember being inundated with VHSs of sharks.
And what's amazing, too, is if you go back to those old school Jacques Cousteau documentary videos and things,
yeah, he's
very non-confrontational about the sharks. Like, he doesn't want them to be perceived as predators, not as dangerous predators, really.
Right.
Like, they like to highlight that in some ways so that it's, fascinating to the viewer.
Right.
But he goes out of his way in a lot of those videos to be like, these aren't killers. Like, they're not here to eat you. Like, just,
what's your favorite?
Study them and think about them in a way that doesn't involve them eating you. And like, when you trace it back, like Jaws itself had a huge impact on the sharking industry.
Yeah, and really fucked things over for the sharks.
There was one of my ichthyology professors, so the study of fish professors at university, he had some statistics on this, and like Jaws literally caused like a massive kill of sharks off the coast of the United States and every part of the U.S. just because of panic.
I mean, it's a scary fucking shark in that movie, but they're the great. Jaws is supposed to be a great white. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and great whites, although dangerous, aren't actually the most dangerous.
No, they say bull sharks probably are.
Bull sharks, yeah, bull sharks and tigers, but bull sharks especially.
Bull sharks will come into like shallower water.
They'll come into shallow water. They'll go into fresh water.
But I think the bulls end up in like sediment-rich water a lot of the time too, where it's murky. So they'll just bite things out of interest. Whereas the great whites tend to be deeper ocean. Like, you're not going to get an 18-foot great white shark creeping too close to the shore, because if it gets stuck, it's not going to get back. But a 10-foot bull shark still can do a lot of damage, and it's right there. I saw some reports recently that they think something like 30 or 40% of the shark attacks they attributed to great whites off the Florida and Caribbean coasts were actually probably bull sharks.
Oh, no kidding. Well, I know they've found bull sharks. I mean, they found them all the way up in the Chicago River, in some instances. I mean, they can swim upstream pretty quickly. Yeah, they definitely can. It's there's not a lot of fish that can do that, but there's very few sharks that can do it. It involves like an adaptation in the gill filament that, like, the cells that move chlorine in and out basically reverse. But it's a very it's a very costly thing to do physiologically. So it's surprising that there's a big shark that can do it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a slightly different mechanism. I'm not sure, but it's. I mean, imagine seeing something like a bull shark in a river, and like, yeah, that would be fucking terrifying. And it does happen in Africa and stuff as well. Like, it's. Oh, really? The bull sharks will get up in there too? Yep. Yeah, definitely. But that's crazy. Yeah, my favorite shark is still the hammerhead. I think they are. Oh, because they're so fucking weird looking. They are. But there's reasons for it. But it's yeah, they're just why are they built like that? So there's a scientist named Peter Climley, and he did his PhD on hammerheads actually. But they're off the Southern Californian coast there. Mm-hmm. There's a big population. There's also great whites he studies there as well. But I don't know that this is definitive. But his research showed this pretty succinctly. So right off the coast there's a bunch of seamounts, so underwater mountains. That used to be have volcanic activity. So they have, a stream of magma basically that comes out the top and then creates these lines that move outwards from the seamounts. So you have this mountain in the middle of the ocean with a bunch of spokes
basically coming off of it in different directions.
Mhm.
And in some cases, they go for miles and miles and miles. And then there's other seamounts nearby, and what have you. But so what this guy observed was these sharks would just hang out in this seamount. So there'd be a huge school of hammerhead sharks around this seamount. And then as the darkness kind of came in, they would start migrating out, and suddenly they'd all vanish into different directions. And then they would come back, and then there seemed to be some kind of like jockeying for position and whatever else. And yeah, so what he figured out was basically the hammerheads are using the hammer as an electro-sensing organ. So all sharks have these on their snouts. They have these cells. Actually, they're not even cells, but they're called the ampullae of Lorenzini. So they're a sensory organ.
Isn't that the stuff that the guys that have found out know where to touch them can put a shark to sleep?
Yes, similar kind of idea that you can kind of sedate them by stimulating them in the right way.
Sure.
But on most sharks, they're concentrated just on the snout, and then they use them to detect vibrations in the water, or they think actually in close proximity they can detect literally like your muscle depolarizing. There's a slight electrical conduction in your muscles from your nerves and everything.
Yeah,
they think that these sharks can actually detect that in the water. And when you look at actually the Greenland shark that I mentioned earlier, you can actually see the ampullae of Lorenzini on their snout, which you can't normally see with the naked eye. And we think they're bigger on the Greenland shark because they're blind, so they have a better
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
But anyway, the hammerhead, by using the hammer and moving those cells across a wider space, they have a much better resolution.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like they have They have so they if you watch a hammerhead swim, I mean all sharks kind of undulate from side to side anyway, but the hammerhead has a really exaggerated side to side motion when it swims, especially if it's near its home range and it's just it's not obviously going somewhere. So they think that it uses the hammer to basically detect differences in the electromagnetic field, and then it would follow the magma paths out into the deeper ocean until they found squid hunting grounds, because the hammerheads largely eat a lot of squid or fish. Anyway, piece by piece, this guy put together that the hammer was used as a navigational tool. And again, by spacing them out further, they were able to get a greater resolution on what direction they should be going in.
That makes a lot more sense.
So there is actually an explanation for it. People still look at them like these weird.
Well, I mean, they just look alien. Especially when you have a general idea of what a shark looks like, and then you throw a fucking hammerhead in there.
Well, and also
it's off-putting.
What must their eyesight look like? Right? Like it must be.
Yeah, how does that work?
I'm not really. I don't think anybody really knows, because you can't trap these things and study them in captivity. It's almost impossible to study captive sharks. They don't survive in captivity.
Really? Most of them don't?
No, there are some, I believe, in parts of the world. But
I've seen a few in the Shed Aquarium here in Chicago.
Okay. I'm
fucking with you.
I don't know, but like the nurse sharks and like certain species of sharks, you can throw in there. But like bigger predators, I know great whites don't take well to captivity.
No.
And perhaps hammerheads would, because they're not quite as aggressive, but again, they need, I don't know, there's no stimulation for them in those environments. There's no, it's a tough thing, but yeah, no, I've always found hammerheads to be fascinating. And again, like if you do put them in captivity, they're not going to let you study their brain to figure out what's happening with each eye.
You don't think so? What if you asked?
Oh, I'd like to do all kinds of crazy mad scientist experiments, but they're just evil. That's all. But yeah, no, and it's so I think the picture the hammerhead gets from that sense must paint like a very different picture than what we see the world as. So
I would assume it'd be completely different. I mean, just the fact that the eyes can't even, you can't go cross-eyed with a fucking hammerhead. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, I don't. I have no real concept of how.
Yeah, there's no way you can even fathom what they're looking at. So how much? Here's a random question, because I have to ask, because I have a scientist on. I listen to the Joe Rogan podcast.
Mm-hmm.
How much does it frustrate you that flat Earth is a thing again? Or is it? Or do you think these people are just trolling and no one really believes this?
Yeah. Well, there's been a couple people in the podcast group that have kind of tried to tempt me into commenting on the flat Earth stuff, and I am tempted, but it's not worth even commenting on. Yeah. That's my perspective on it. Like, have you've seen the cartoon mock-ups of what the universe would look like? It's like every planet's round and spherical, and there's this little disc just floating there.
Right.
Why would that be? I don't.
But you've been up to the Arctic, right?
I have seen the curvature of the Earth, and I've looked.
What I was going to ask you is, have you seen the ice wall that the flat Earthers are talking about?
Yeah, well, they're going to the Antarctic to find the ice wall up there or down there. Right? That's I don't even know how to.
It's really not even worth. Like when Rogan brings it up on his podcast, I just roll my eyes and I just think to myself, well, come on, bro. You're smarter than this. Don't give this any time.
I mean, I think Rogan's just putting it out there because it gets him listens, right? I don't think he actually believes it.
No, he doesn't believe it. He does it first off to fuck around with people. Also, his boy Eddie Bravo actually kind of believes it, but because he's just a conspiracy theorist in general, so he'll entertain it a little bit just to show how dumb Eddie Bravo is. But yeah, it's funny.
I have some interest in listening to some of those crackpots that are talking about all the conspiracy theories and things. Like I don't believe that the world is out to get us in that way.
It's just too many people. If for a lot of those conspiracy theories, and there are some that I think have a volition or are valid. Rogan always mentions the Gulf of Tonkin and other things as well, but there's just too many. For instance, the flat Earth thing. If that was a conspiracy, there's too many people in the know of this that are hiding it. There's the chain of command is so far along now that too many people are in on it, and that's for a lot of it conspiracies, in my opinion. There's just too many people that would have to be in on it. Yeah. For it to be,
there'd be more people getting killed randomly properly. And stuff, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like if they were actually trying to cover this up. But I mean, for me, the flat Earth thing is the funniest part. Is like, and I know they contend that we never went to space, so that's part of the argument.
Yes, also,
but we never would have been able to blast into space without understanding that the Earth is spherical and that there's a force of gravity that acts on a spherical planet and a spherical moon, and you know what I mean? Like it's the basic fundamentals of a lot of the calculations of cosmic things that we know of are based on that.
And there's a lot of everyday inventions that are because of NASA research.
Satellites, right? It's again,
even like the phone, like anything, a lot of the stuff we use every day is because of NASA research or military research, and to benefit off of that, but then deny that these other things happened just is a hypocritical stance. To benefit off of the technology that you're able to use every day and believe that this technology works, but then believe, because I didn't see this happen, it couldn't have worked, is a flawed stance to have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was the one guy that was building his own rockets. Do you see that guy? And he was launching himself into like the...
Oh, no.
I don't know how far up he was getting. He was getting pretty high, though. He's getting like 15, 20 kilometers up. Like,
what is he trying to prove?
He was trying to see that the Earth was flat.
Oh my god!
he actually wanted to get to the point where he was in the the troposphere, and they could see, could see space, and then could confirm that the Earth was just flat. Which baffles me that some asshole was willing to strap himself to something that he built in his backyard.
Oh my god! Yeah, we'll move on from that because it's fun to troll that. But it's not. It's not something that really needs to be discussed.
Well, the other interesting thing somebody brought up just to anger me the other day was the hollow Earth theory, I guess.
Oh wait, what's?
Which is it's basically the Aquaman.
Explain that to me again.
No, it's basically the Aquaman theory.
Oh yeah.
Once you get to a certain point through the Earth, you'll have to go through the mantle and then whatever else. But at some point, you'll get to a place where it's just a hollow, another Earth. It's warmed by the core of the Earth, so there's a warm ocean and all these other things in there. And I don't even know how.
This is the problem with social media is I feel like this stupidity has always kind of been around.
Yeah,
but now you can hear about it from it's more prevalent to hear about the stupidity. Whereas,
and get people to join up.
And get people to join up, right.
Like,
Whereas
no problem.
15, 20 years ago, the asshole that believed that the earth was hollow maybe spoke that to 20 of his friends in his town, and then 10 of them probably went, you're an idiot. And the other 10 maybe thought about it, and then they forgot about it. But now you can discuss this with millions of people across the internet, and when you extrapolate dumb theories across the internet, someone's going to fucking believe it.
Exactly. And that's, I don't know. I mean, that's why it doesn't surprise me that so many people deny climate change, that so many people believe the crap that Trump puts out there, that so many people, are willing to just believe shit.
So it's 99% that's the stat right now
for climate change.
Yeah.
I believe it's amongst the like scientists that study that type thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're in some kind of field related to it. It's 99%. So normally in science, we set the threshold at 0.05. So 5% would be our, when you have a statistically significant result, you accept that it might be wrong 5% of the time by random chance. Right? Like, that's just when you're doing math and you're working with a small sample size, that's kind of the statistical thing that you accept. But obviously with climate change, we're trying to look for a bigger and better number. So ideally we'll get it to like 99.9%, but 99% or even 98% or anything above 95 is within the acceptable scientific realm of this is not by chance or by natural cycle. This is something that's being influenced by humans.
Now, it's being influenced by human, but I think a lot of people agree on that. Now, the rate at which people are influencing climate change, is that up for debate? Like, are some people saying it's way more than it should be, and are some are saying it's being influenced by humans, but it's nothing we should be concerned about?
Okay, yeah, that's a sensitive question, but I think it's important, and I think so. Different models calculated in different years will give you a slightly different estimate, right? Like, and this is how we've ended up with in 50 years, there's going to be catastrophic sea level rise. In 100 years, there's going to be catastrophic sea level rise. In 20 years, you know what I mean? It keeps going back and forth. And I think that's because people keep essentially recalculating these values based on new short-term projections in the model. You know what I mean? Like, you're adding 5 years at a time, right?
Right.
Or you're adding 2 years at a time. I'm not sure how they do it exactly. But I don't think they add it necessarily year to year because, again, that's not going to show you a long-term trend.
Right.
But when you add another 10 years to the end of a long-term cycle, if there's a big change in that 10 years, it can shift that curve quite a lot. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that line that you're fitting that predicts what that date is. And when we're projecting it back over thousands of years or hundreds of years, a fluctuation of 20 to 50 years is not actually that unexpected. Like statistically, that's within the realm of error.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's so. I mean, whether there's catastrophic sea level rise in 2100, 2050, 2150, or 2200, it maybe is not the point. And is what I'm getting at. You know what I mean? Like, it's the problem that we got to earlier as well is, again, people are short-sighted, right? People want results and things that they can see immediately, and that's what politicians focus on. So the politicians that are anti-climate change focus on those fluctuations and the uncertainty.
Sure, the day-to-day.
They said we were going to be underwater by now. Where's that? Like, but now they say 50 years, and then they say 100 years. But again, that's, if you're looking at these actual models, like that range of error is not that unusual. So I know people want more.
People want answers right now, and it seems like the answer is we need to study this more. And I feel like it hasn't been studied in science years. It really hasn't even been studied all that long to make definitive conclusions on what's going to happen, other than, yes, humans are affecting this in a way that's unnatural to the way the Earth is.
No, you're exactly right. There hasn't been any serious study in this area, I don't think, for more than, say, 60 years. And And I mean,
that's a blip on the Earth life cycle. That's nothing. That's nothing in terms of the weather patterns on Earth.
Although, like, the first climate change paper was proposed, or the first climate change person that postulated that there was going to be an issue with CO2 was in the 1800s, because he observed that there was a heat trapping effect of CO2. It was a pretty basic approach and a basic idea, and it was known that this would probably be an issue throughout the second industrial revolution, but it wasn't the priority, and the priorities were the wars, the depression, like feeding people and making sure we were defending our nations and things. So now we're at a point where this has become a bigger issue, but it's been put off for so long that I don't know. But at the same time, like you said, it's a short time that we've been studying it, but people still want these long-term results, and we're not there yet. And when people do try to give long-term results, they get chastised, like when they're off by 50 years in a 1,000-year projection, which is not, you know what I mean?
It's not that big of that's not that big of a difference at that point. 50 years is nothing.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think that's my perspective on it. I think the models they've built and the things they've been doing are incredible. Mm-hmm. They don't get enough credit because they spend so much fucking time arguing with people about whether or not what they're doing is real or not, when they're spending the time doing the statistics. You know what I mean? And doing the math that, again, it's not manipulating the data, it's revealing the proper trends in the data.
Yeah, so, this era we live in where people aren't believing scientists it's
gotten crazy.
Concerning, man.
It's gotten crazy, and people aren't shy about voicing their scientific opinions on things when they have no understanding of it.
Yeah, zero understanding of what's going on.
Whereas, like, when people start voicing their opinions on economics and shit like that, they get shut on instantly. You know what I mean? But yet, some politician that has no fucking idea what he's talking about can get up there and
question science, and everyone starts to then question what he questioned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Put up a graph on some like visual aid that is like, his little intern made for him, and suddenly he's an expert on climate change.
You know what really kind of hurt that though is the fact that Al Gore was the guy in America that brought up climate change.
Fair enough.
Because it was, he's a politician. He brings it up. Everyone's thinking it's a political thing that he brought up, and he might have used it for his own political gain. So that kind of wasn't the best start.
I definitely think there was some, political jockeying on his part there. But I also do think that was a really interesting presentation. Like, he did a good job with that, and he had a lot of good science in it. That was the kind of shitty part about it.
It was just because he was the messenger that.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time,
we got shit for it.
But it wouldn't have gotten.
But it wouldn't have got out there either. We wouldn't be talking about it, right?
It wouldn't have gotten disseminated to the same people if it wasn't him. So, like, you put a scientist up there. We got scientists all the time across the world talking about climate change, and nobody cares. So
no one gives a two fucks. Yeah.
It's again, like I said, it's a very trying time right now with people being concerned with their day-to-day expenses and whatever else, and then being like, well, climate change is going to increase that if they're going to charge me for carbon taxes and yada, yada, yada. But, like, every day, your expenses are going up anyway because of climate change. You just don't recognize it. You know what I mean? Like,
to disseminate that message and explain it to every individual person is a lot of work.
It is, and nobody, and it's almost impossible. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
it's an impossible task.
Like, there are prairie provinces in Canada that are locked into the middle of our continent that had huge flooding issues in the last couple of years because the Mackenzie River connects to the ocean, and there's been floods in certain parts of the country where there never have been as extensive floods as there have been, and et cetera, et cetera. And the people in those areas are the first ones to fight any initiative to try and do anything about climate change because they're in the oil provinces, and they're in the places where we're getting the oil from. So they're torn between their economic needs and their,
that's
their connection of that flooding, which is definitely connected to climate change. But they don't want to, pay for it. I don't know. It's a very difficult.
That's tough. An interesting dichotomy. Well, what we should worry about is that meteorite that's going to hit us that will level this planet. That's what we should be worried about.
Well, and again, that's a very real, possibility.
Did you see that they Rogan mentioned this, that they found a meteorite impact or an asteroid, whatever, asteroid or meteorite impact somewhere that was the cause of the last ice age or something like that? Did you see that?
Yeah, I did see something about that. I don't know details.
I didn't. Yeah, I'm not all that familiar with it either. But that's a real thing that could happen.
Definitely. Well, we did also have another recent meteor pass that was surprisingly close to the planet. You know what I mean?
God, that's fucking terrifying.
Well, within a certain distance,
close.
Calculate it.
Close in relative terms of space isn't all that close. For us.
But again, I believe it was one of those ones that snuck up. They didn't predict was coming because it was shot off of some random asteroid belt somewhere, what have you. But that kind of stuff, I don't know. Maybe there's a plan to deal with that. But are we going to send up Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck to go deal with that? I know they have plans. They have plans to mine asteroids, right? So they must have a plan to land on an asteroid. So there must be. Maybe
well, all you would, from what and this is me doing my bro science, but I remember looking into it, and I mean, you would need to obviously identify it right away, and then need to attach something to that asteroid to just push it slightly off course, so that by the time it gets to Earth, it's out of the path.
Yeah, that's either you blow something up on it that disrupts its course, or you just weight it down, and if it's far enough away, exactly, you could just. You can calculate that. Yeah. Any small tail or something on it would just, veer it off by a small degree, and you're done. Right? It's that's what always amazes me about those old school space travel events, like when you watch Apollo 13 and all that kind of crap, when they're calculating their projections around the sun, around the moon, and how it's going to slingshot them back to Earth, and yada yada yada, calculations that are off by fractions of a percent. They were doing with slide rulers in a little tinfoil thing while they're freezing to death.
They didn't go up there though, so it wasn't real. So that's why.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the
that's why it seems impossible, because it never happened.
But that space travel and being an astronaut was one thing that I always wished I could do, but I never would have the opportunity.
Well, they're not sending too many people up in space anymore, are they?
Well, no, and in Canada we have a pretty good space program actually, but there's 8 or 10, I think, proper astronauts. You know what I mean? People there.
Yeah, that's such a small industry to get into.
Well, and by the time I thought about it, I was past my prime, and I also figured out that I had a slight heart issue and a slight brain issue with pressure. So
you'd be out.
Those two things would kill me instantly if I tried to blast myself into the atmosphere. But Chris Hadfield, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's spent some of the most time in space out of any astronaut.
Okay.
He was on the ISS forever. He was the Canadian that was playing the guitar for a lot of the time. If you ever saw those broadcasts.
Yeah. Yep.
But he's the epitome of a cool scientist. You know what I mean? He doesn't shy away from the fact that he's a geek and he loves math and he loves science, but he's but it sent me to space. And he's right. And I'm up here playing a guitar, I
got to do the coolest shit ever.
And he tweeted all the time while he was on the ISS, and just, I think he personally engaged so many thousands of kids in wanting to be scientists, whether or not they were astronauts. I think he literally changed, a little bit of the academic landscape just with the stuff that he was able to draw interest to,
Yeah, I mean, science needs to be cooler. It needs to be, and it is cool, but it needs to be publicized as being cool.
I think it's honestly, and I say this with no irony, I think the superhero genre helps that, because
that's true.
When you think about it, again, literally all the major characters are brilliant scientists.
That's absolutely true. I mean, you got Hulk, Tony Stark, you got T'Challa's brilliant, his sister's brilliant.
Peter Parker is a brilliant scientist.
Peter Parker, yeah, exactly. Everyone, it's not cool to be
Richards.
Right. It's not cool to be a dumb guy.
No. The leaders are, and again, now they've made, Sue Storm's a genius. Again, most of these characters are scientists in some way or another, and
That's a good way. I didn't even think about that. That most of the cool, especially in Marvel, most of the cool characters are scientists.
Yeah, and again, I think we talked about this in episode 155 in the Jock and Nerd, where I think Stan Lee had a huge, just like, I opened a cold one, by the way.
Yeah, what are you popping open? What kind of beer are you drinking over there?
Kronenberg Blanc.
What the fuck is that?
So it's a wheat beer.
Oh, nice.
It's springtime. I'm getting in the mood.
So I'm pounding down a water as we speak. So it shows the levels we're at.
No, you're better human than me.
Weekday drinking is rough for me. I can't. If I drink on the weekday, I'm one of those drinkers where if I have one, I'm having like 7, and then I'm gonna wake up hungover.
I am usually too, so I'm gonna try and. I'm not gonna party in my apartment by myself later, so hopefully it'll all be good. But yeah, you're right. I think again the perception of science has always been that geeky kind of aspect of it, but I think that's changed quite a bit. Yeah,
that's a good point. I think you might be right about that. It changing.
And again, even myself, like I did well in science and I did well in math, but I was also a jockey kid, and I never really associated with like the nerdy kids in school. Even though I would have paintings for art class that were Spider-Man and Wolverine, like I never got mocked for it. You know what I mean? It was never. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Because it was like, oh, that's an awesome painting. Like, fuck. So, I don't know. I think that maybe there's been a transition at some point.
I think it is, at least for me, in my perception of the world, is it's cool to have multiple interests in multiple things. I feel like the label of being a nerd or a geek or a jock or whatever you are, I don't know. I'm not in high school anymore, so I don't know if that's still a thing. But me personally, I don't feel like those labels all exist for me, or do I even care? I like what I like, and I think that's getting to the point with a lot of people where they like what they like.
I think that was like definitely even when I was in high school, I think that's the way it was. Well, there was still definitely the like the band geek kids and stuff like that, but they had their own crew of people and they partied and did their own thing. So like it was never I don't know, it was never that weird hierarchy of crap that you see in movies.
So how are you on time, by the way?
I'm good for now. Yeah.
You good for now? Okay. Mm-hmm. We can keep going. We're almost at 2 hours, but we'll keep it going because this is good. How does a smart motherfucker like you come across the stupidity that is the Jock and Nerd podcast? And I'm sorry, I'm sure I've asked you this before, but quite frankly, I've forgotten, and I want to know again.
No, that's cool. So there was a point during my PhD where literally I had done all of my lab work. I had done a lot of stuff, and I just had to sit at a computer and stare at these graphs, and you basically just have to highlight the area under a curve. So if there's a little peak, you know what I mean, like a triangle shape in the graph, you highlight the area under it, and then it creates a concentration for you. I had to do that for like 9 months. So on top of the months that I'd already put into it. So I just needed something to listen to all the time that was good. And so I listened to a lot of music. And I've always been a big music fan of all kinds, but that's when I discovered podcasts. Really, there's a radio show I listened to around Toronto called the Dean Blundell Show, and they used to put a podcast out of their show after the show on iTunes, and so that led me to the iTunes app, and then I realized that there was like thousands of podcasts on there, and I had no idea.
Yeah, so many.
So I started just downloading stuff that was geek related because I was like, oh shit, wow, there's people talking about all this random crap. Mm-hmm. But there is so much garbage out there, man, and like, just
a lot of it. I mean, I don't mean to sound like I'm on top of the hill because I'm not, but there's a lot of just garbage podcasts, which is not only bad content but poor sound quality, poor show structure, all sorts of garbage. And
again, I'm willing to lean on the poor sound quality if it's a really interesting podcast, or I'm willing, you know what I mean? I'm willing to give up X and Y if one of the other things is exceptionally good.
Right. Totally.
So, I mean, the main one that I found, and I'm sure you guys listen to, is The Weekly Planet.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys were awesome, and I still listen to that every week. I think they're funny. They have a good back and forth.
Yeah, they definitely got good rapport, and they're both Aussie, which helps too, because it's just something different sounding if you're from North America.
Yeah.
And they're they're legitimately funny guys. They have good banter.
Yeah, no, again, I think they're legitimately, like, they're just, like, they'd be funny to hang out with, you know what I mean? Like, It doesn't feel put on. And I also was listening to, I won't say some of the other names because I don't want to badmouth anybody, but there was a few other podcasts that I listened to for a while that I thought were interesting, but I don't know, self-serving or just, not interesting, or the sound quality was not up to par. So when I found your guys, it was an interesting mix because, again, first of all, you and Anthony, or you and Imran are very different.
Yes.
And then you throw a Rug Boy in.
You think so? You think we're different?
Well, I mean, that comes across like immediately. Like, but then Rug Boy is also kind of the man in the middle who gets to kind of play off both.
Yeah.
And you don't agree with each other on everything, which was a big deciding factor for me. Because I like to hear the dissenting points of view, not just people like jerking each other off for an hour. But yeah, again, and one of the main things for me, so I told this to Imran early on, is it's kind of like listening to young me at the time argue with old me.
Oh yeah.
About certain things, and because I was very much more so in your kind of realm of, I don't know, the attitude, I guess. And I've chilled out a little bit in my old age, but it was a funny. Yeah, a funny progression with your show. And then even like the sound clips, the sound quality is good.
Yes.
The intro is awesome. And then there's the after these messages, we'll be right back. And those little fills that actually were, part of the cartoons that I watched as a child.
Oh, no kidding. That's crazy.
So that shit hooked me like right away. I was like, okay, I'm in. So
yeah. So
right from, I think, I forget when I picked it up, but it was like show like 18 or 17.
Oh wow, you're deep.
And then around that time, I started also kind of hitting up some of the people from the various podcasts on Twitter, and commenting on some of the stuff they were posting, just trying to see if I could get on their podcast as a science expert.
Were we the only ones that responded?
Well, Imran actually, before I think I even had a chance to hit you guys up, I tweeted something about something that he had said, but I hadn't hit him up yet, and he actually asked me if I wanted to be on.
Oh, no kidding.
But yeah, we had interacted a few times back and forth, and then at some point he was like, "I've always wanted to do a Science of Superheroes show. Do you want to come on?" And I was like, "I've been jonesing to do a Science of Superheroes show.
I've been waiting all my life for this. What are you talking about? Of course."
So yeah, I think you said it in a good way on one of the first episodes I was on, where you were like, "It's like you two guys were at a dance on the opposite sides of the wall." like looking at each other, being like, "Hey, you want to dance?" And it was kind of very much, I think, like that. And so after I came on your show the first time, I don't know. You guys have a fun rapport. It's interactive, and it's not scripted, and it's interesting to listen to.
I appreciate that, and now you're on this show, which has none of those qualities, so that's good. I'm glad you can make it to this show.
Well, I'm curious to see if anybody will listen to me.
They will
talk this nonsense for this long, but
they definitely will listen to you. I've gotten some pretty good feedback on the show. I mean, the whole concept of this one was and I think I've explained this maybe a few times, but I'll explain it again because I like to talk. The whole concept of this is to get interesting people on that I just want to talk to and learn from and have a conversation with.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not supposed to be interview format. You've been asking me questions. That's fine. I'm fine to interject my opinion or what I think on things as well. But instead of being kind of limited to the comic book genre and having to, let's talk about this for 2 minutes. Okay, let's talk about this for 2 minutes. This is more of just a relaxed format where I can just hang out and talk to somebody and just learn, which is hopefully the audience is getting that vibe too, and they're liking it because every time it's going to be someone different. And this is the 7th episode. This is by far the most different out of all 7 in terms of the content. I don't think anyone prior to this has ever really talked about polar bears and the Inuit and contaminants out there. So
awesome. Well,
I like it.
Yeah, I'm glad I can provide something different, man. It's and like I said, I've been to parts of the world that most people don't get to see. It's important to me in a number of ways to try and bring attention to that, but also to the work that we do and why it's important. And
how cold is it up in the Arctic when you were up there?
So
I'm going to have to pull out my Google machine because you're going to probably say it in Celsius, which means I'll have to translate to Fahrenheit.
I can't.
Us Americans, Fahrenheit is really the only way to fucking go.
Yeah, God, you're the only fucking ones. Just
We're the only ones.
Just like the inches and shit. It doesn't make any sense. But all your scientists do things in meters and whatnot. By the way,
good. Is that right? Okay, well, they're not fucking real Americans. Get them out of here.
So yeah, so normally I would go to Resolute in like June. So it would be anywhere at the coldest points in like the early morning to like -20 to
Celsius.
Yeah, to like even +10 at some points, like during the day if the sun's right above you and it's like shining down. And those are the best days ever because it's clear, you're on the ice, you have some nets in your hand, you're doing some like physical work, and it's just gorgeous outside.
Well, yeah, 10 Celsius, that's not bad.
But then
50 degrees Fahrenheit.
But then the thing in the Arctic is like the temperature shifts and the conditions change like instantly. So you can be in the middle of a sunny day, like doing some plankton sampling in a hole, and it's 10 degrees Celsius, and then suddenly the wind kicks up and it flips to -10, and there's a storm coming in, and it starts freezing rain on you, and then you're fucked because you have to get between there and the town, which is 100 kilometers away. So over rough ice and like and whatnot. So, but the worst condition that I ever was in cold wise was in Joe Haven, and I went on a 3-day seal hunt.
Okay.
So I was with a family that was out for a traditional seal hunt. So there was no guns involved. It was only harpooning, which is a very like patient game to play. But we were out on the land, and then me and this little guy. So I was with one of the little brothers in this family, and we got lost. So we got separated from the rest of the family. And again, we were like 250 kilometers away from any town, and we lost everybody else. And he was like, "Don't worry, just go this way. I'm sure we're on the right track."
Oh my God!
And of course, he knows where he's going. He's not an idiot. So we went, and eventually we found the family.
Oh, so were you scared at all?
I was.
Yeah.
But he kept patting me on the shoulder and being like, "Don't worry, they're over here. Trust me, it's okay." And he was like 14, so like I had to believe the kid. He knew what he was doing.
If he's calm, then it's got to be all right. He's only 14 and he's super calm about this.
Exactly. And anyway, we get to the family, and then they were like, "Okay, we need to set up the tents now." And they just break out these tents and set up these tents in the middle of the like ocean, essentially. And the weather kicked up, and then the next morning it was I forget what the Celsius temperature was like -38. The wind chill was like I don't even know, it was like -50 or something like that.
Oh my God.
So like any exposed skin or any wet
negative 36 to the Americans.
Anything that was exposed like will freeze, and like you're done. And like my boots actually were only insulated down to like -40. One of them cracked. So water started leaking into my boot, and like luckily they had more gear for me. I felt
God!
And I felt like an idiot because like I didn't bring the gear that actually wouldn't freeze in the Arctic.
Holy fuck!
That trip actually too. I also that was the only time I fell through the ice, and there's a decent chance I could have actually died. But the same kid. So when you're walking along the ice flow, and especially if there's snow, usually you have a pole, so they use their harpoons often. So they just prod at the snow in front of them, right? Like they poke down until they hit solid ice, and then they walk. So I was following this kid, Ambrose, and he was following his father, who was like 20 meters ahead of him. We were walking, and suddenly what he was walking on wasn't there, and I fell like straight down.
Oh my God.
And
into what?
Into the water.
Oh fuck.
So I felt my lower half like submerged. I stuck my arms out as they train you to do, like in a panic method, and you have these little picks around your neck. So these they're basically like 2-inch long sticks that are like again picks that you can like use to pull yourself out of the ice. But it doesn't work if there's snow in front of you because the snow just flattens, right? So I was trying to pull myself out in the snow, but the snow kept just pushing into the hole. And I was yelling, but the wind was blowing against me.
Oh my God.
So the kid that was in front of me didn't notice until he was like, I don't know, 10 meters 20 meters down the road, so like 30 feet away, 40 feet away. And in this time, my legs are in the water, and I'm starting to fucking panic now because he doesn't see me, and his father doesn't see me, and they're walking in the opposite direction. Anyway, eventually he heard me, and as he heard me, I kind of managed to get purchase in the snow, and I pulled myself kind of out.
Oh, jeez.
And then him and his dad came and grabbed me. I was in shock because I don't really remember much, but they got the tent up, and then they got the Coleman stove, like a little propane burning stove on, and had me sitting by it. They had me strip out of my clothes, like instantly, obviously, and they were drying those, but yeah, before I knew what happened, they had already had me by a little stove, and I was warm, and I was okay.
And they're prepared for that. It's crazy.
It was literally fucking 5 minutes, I would say, max, between when they realized they pulled me out of the water, dropped me on the snow, had this like makeshift tent up, put the stove inside of it, had me warming by it, and everything was okay.
In that moment when this happens,
I kissed my ass goodbye.
Yeah, that's got to be a moment where you're going, I might go. This might be it.
Well, especially when I went through and then I started trying to grab the snow and pull, and the snow came into the hole.
Oh, God.
Because I was
that's the moment where I break down right there. I'm going, this might be good.
I think you'd be surprised. Your self-preservation instinct kind of also kicks in too. Right?
Yeah.
So you're like, I was in panic, but I was also like, okay,
like still fighting to get.
I knew this might happen at some point.
Right.
Let's not fucking freak out. Like whatever.
Right.
And we looked at the hole afterwards, and I have to say, I don't think it was my Arctic survival techniques that saved me. I think it was the fact that the fucking hole was too small for me to go all the way through.
Oh God. Do you wear
you wear a flotation suit?
I'm going to make a fashion question. Were you wearing your Canada Goose jacket? Are you aware about those things?
If you want to not get ripped off in the north, don't ever wear a Canada Goose jacket. They will.
Really?
They will take you for every dollar you have if they see you wearing one of those things.
I mean, down here they're a fashion statement, and they
they're also very fashionable up here, and Trudeau and like all of our government officials wear them when they're in the north.
They are quite warm. I'll give them that.
They are.
They are quite warm. Also down here, there's been a string of, if you see people wearing them and getting robbed for their Canada Goose jackets
in Chicago.
Oh yeah,
I can see that.
Yeah. I mean, they're expensive fucking jackets.
I think they're like $700 or $800 minimum.
Yes.
I think they're nice jackets. I would personally.
Are there better functional jackets that are less pricey?
I don't know that are available to people, but if I continue to work in the Arctic, which I hope to do, I want to get a handmade parka for me from a person in the community that I know and love, and they will use like eider duck feathers and seal fur and whatnot to stuff it. Like it's, I've been given some of the parkas they wear,
and they're quite warm.
They come down to like your mid thigh or your mid calf even, and like it's not. We don't know how to make stuff like those things are. It's amazing the quality of the items they make up there. Like I have an order in for sealskin mittens. Which might get me like egged down here because of animal rights activists. But
oh my God,
they take the seal fur, they turn it inside out, and so that the outside is the leather and the inside is the fur, and then the ring around the wrist is wolf fur, and they're some of the best mittens and the best the best feeling things you've ever had in your hands. I think the Inuit. Again, the Canada Goose jacket is a bit of a target, but it's also, it's functional. It's also a practical and functional item.
It's functional. It is also a statement of, I got some money.
Exactly, and I think that's what when a handful of 5 government officials comes up there and they're all wearing jackets that cost $7,500 between them. It's not really perceived that well for people that are struggling to pay for
that's a
food
good
and
point.
water.
That's a good point. When your politicians are rocking expensive shit, and I'm struggling to survive over here, I probably wouldn't take too kindly to that either.
However, again, some of the people on the higher ends of the Inuit boards and things like that are also quite well off. So you got to be, I don't know. it's hit and miss in terms of where people are getting outraged. But yeah, in a lot of cases, I think the Inuit folks are very much justified in their outrage for a lot of the stuff they see.
Yeah, I would say they might be a little not entitled to their outrage. How about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to put it, to be honest. Do you
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you.
Oh, I was going to say, speaking of outrage, does it piss you off when you see the science in movies and you go, that's not fucking right at all? Or do you can you choose to ignore it?
It depends on the context of the movie and the show. Like, for example, like CSI, that TV show bothers me to no end. Because they
what's wrong in it?
They pipette something out of like a body. They'll take like the fluid out of a body and then inject it into the machine that I use, and it spits out something. And they're like, "Oh, it's mercury. Clearly, all right, it's mercury from this parking lot in this place." It's like, no, oh god. But in terms of I don't know. In terms of the superhero science and stuff, I don't get too bent out of shape about it.
No.
There are things like the Dark Knight conundrum where Bruce Wayne fired the bullet into the wall and then pieced together a fingerprint
off a fragment
from a bullet that fragmented in a completely different way than the one that fragmented the first time. That kind of stuff. It's like you didn't need to extend it that far. You could have found a much more creative way for him to figure that out.
That was so absurd. There was the one scene where they were basically going, okay, let's show how Bruce Wayne is a detective, and they decided to take a fingerprint off a fragmented bullet that
he doesn't have.
He doesn't have and could never be recreated.
I know the way that bullet broke would never happen in the same way.
Do that. Yeah, you couldn't do it. You could get the same exact piece of cement and it wouldn't happen the same way.
I think he fired it 3 or 4 times, right? That was the experiment.
Yeah.
You need to fire it a billion times.
He fired it like 3 or 4 times and took the average of how it would have happened, I think, or some shit.
If he had fired it once, then run it through a computer simulation that ran like a billion simulations, I would have been like, okay, done. Maybe that works. Anyway,
but a computer doing the science isn't as cool as him doing the science.
But yeah, no, that's my greatest hope for this new Batman movie is that it'll be more detective focused, right? Like it's I don't know where did you come in the Batman world? Are you like a Batman should kick ass, or you a Batman should be a detective guy?
So I'm a huge Batman guy. My view on Batman is I like to see him adapt to what is right for the story. But my favorite itinerations of Batman is Batman existing in a universe where superheroes exist and figuring out, okay, what is his role in this universe and how does he still make it? That for me is always the most interesting Batman. That and when he's challenged morally. Those are the two things. So I don't really have a stand on if he should be a detective or he should just kick ass. I just want to see his importance in the world and his values being challenged.
Fair enough. No, I think that's one of the most interesting things about him too, like the Kingdom Come kind of aspect, right? Where he is the guy that has the formulas that could put everybody down,
right?
If he needed to, you know what I mean?
Right. It's an interesting thing throwing in, with a guy. You have a character like Superman who isn't a god, and Wonder Woman's a god, and Flash is the fastest person on the earth, and Green Lantern can conjure anything. What is the role of a Batman in that dynamic? And I think that's interesting for me, is figuring out his place.
Well, I mean, to me, he always functions as a great point of view character, obviously, which they've always used him as in like the Justice League and things. But yeah, no, for sure, it's that. Again, he often says it in his head or outwards, being like, "I am the only normal or like average person in this mix. What do I do? What do I bring?" And obviously, he brings the fact that he is the tactician and things, which is why Justice League, the movie, was such a fucking joke again too.
That movie's terrible.
But like again, all Affleck did in that movie was invent cool stuff and then destroy it immediately, and then bring in the other cool thing that he invented or whatever. Right. It's like what.
His superpower was he's rich, as he says in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a good joke. But I didn't actually expect that to be the fucking premise.
Yeah, that whole thing was rough.
Well, did you see the like Zack
thing you posted? Was that you?
Yeah, I did post that, but also Snyder's been dropping like tons of information about what he wanted.
What he wanted. I read that whole thing. You know, I would have liked to have seen it just because I wanted to see how his shitty vision would have played out. At least it would have been his vision.
Yep.
I probably would not have liked it because, as you mentioned in the post on our Jock and Nerd Nation page, he doesn't seem to really understand the characters all that well, or seem to want to care about the character. He kind of just wants to create some cool shit around the characters.
Yeah, using their iconic moments, but in like the wrong ways.
Right.
You know,
Entirely the wrong ways.
Like that Batman Superman fight in Batman v Superman was like, you know, visually in some cases like scene for scene, but the whole essence of it was wrong. You know what I mean? It didn't land in the right way because you didn't have like 20 years of history between the characters to
this was the first time you were seeing them on screen together, and you were already playing up a book, The Dark Knight Returns, which was a deconstructionist book about these characters with, like you mentioned, where they've been around for years upon years upon years upon years.
And already had their differences and already like worked them out at some point and yada, yada, yada. Instead you have like, Batman showed up clearly, if he was as smart as he's supposed to be, would have recognized very quickly that he was in the wrong.
Right. And not only was he in the wrong, but he was being used and set up.
Yeah, by Lex Luthor, who's like, you know, a douchebag who clearly is trying to manipulate everybody. Like, everything about it. It's just...
It was bad.
And I don't know. But such good actors and good people in the roles and everything else, and it just fucking pisses me off that they couldn't. You had all the ingredients for a good movie. You had the wrong guy directing it, and probably the wrong writers, and you just had the wrong backing in terms of what DC was looking to do, and they really had no vision. And they clearly hired a guy that was the wrong choice. At least for those characters. Now, if you wanted to put Zack Snyder in a movie where the characters aren't Batman and Superman and all these things, then maybe that would have worked out. But when you throw those characters in there, there's just too much baggage with those characters to kind of fuck with who they are like that. Yeah, they should have bought like another superhero property from whoever, and you know, bastardize that. But it's hard to do with Superman and Batman, and again, like. Whatever. I can talk about this forever. But even Man of Steel, like again, I was listening to it. I
was not a Man of Steel guy either.
See, I enjoyed that movie. I think it was only because I liked Henry Cavill as Superman.
He was the best part. I don't hate that movie like I hate Batman v Superman, and I think Justice League's not that great. Man of Steel, I'm just not a fan, but I don't think it's a bad movie.
No, but so the thing that really kills me is the Jonathan Kent death scene where he's terrible. Like the tornado.
That's terrible, yeah.
And like where he goes back to get the dog. It's like the super son could go to the car and back and nobody would even notice.
Right.
Why would that happen? And then when he just holds up his hand, he's like, "No, don't save me.
Don't save me."
Again, Superman,
don't show your powers.
Again, Superman would just go and he'd be back before anybody even noticed. That's the whole fucking point. What is the I don't know. Again, it's a fundamental weird. They needed that plot point.
Yeah, that plot point really didn't stick with me of why they kept having to hide him. I understand they were trying to go for, well, if the world finds out, you might be treated or seen a certain way. People might judge you or think that this alien invasion is happening. But I don't know. I feel like Superman's character, his character is too good-hearted not to save somebody.
Exactly.
Especially his own fucking parents.
the way they did it in the original Christopher Reeve Superman movie, where he, you know, is in a different party, hears his father have a heart attack in the barn, and he just can't get there in time.
Right.
That,
like, even he has his limits.
That is impactful. You know what I mean? And like that kid, I forget what his name is, that played Superman in that movie. Like I still can listen to that scene, and he's like, I just wasn't fast enough. I couldn't do it. You know, and that has feeling to it. But like Superman watching his dad hold up his hand and be like, "Don't save me," and get sucked up by a tornado. Like, fuck, that doesn't.
That was rough. That was a rough character choice right there.
It's not Twister.
That was strange, real strange.
Anyway, but yeah, I don't know. What do you in the future? What do you think? Do you want them to reinvent the Superman character in like in the new DC thing that they're trying to do, or do you want them to keep Cavill and try and make him right? You know,
I wouldn't mind them keeping Cavill. I feel like he's gotten a raw deal. in this whole thing, because I do actually think that he was a good choice. I think he can play. I think he can play the Superman that me and you are kind of yearning for, which is the upstanding, good-hearted character that is unwavering in his beliefs, but is also genuinely just a good person, similar to Captain America.
Yep. Captain, that would be the perfect.
He's the perfect. Chris Evans should just be Superman as well.
I would accept that.
I would. So I think Henry could be that guy. I'd like to see another movie with Henry Cavill. I feel like DC at this point, though, is trying to detach itself from anything that Snyder did or any of those movies other than Wonder Woman that came out prior to, was it Aquaman? Yeah. So I feel like they're just making movies now to make movies, and they're not really worried about connecting them or anything. So I think I'm pretty sure it's already come out that they've kind of divorced themselves from Henry Cavill. That's kind of unfortunate. I wish he'd get another shot. The Superman he was in Justice League by the end of it, I think, was a decent itineration.
That little scene with the Flash when they were racing, and again, his little interactions with people once he was Superman again.
Right.
Yeah, I think that was perfect.
The best, that scene, and I remember saying this in our review, but when he comes to help the Justice League at the end, the first thing he says is, "How can I help?" Mm-hmm. And that's Superman in a nutshell right there. He's just coming to help you out. Like, he's not, there's no ulterior motive. He genuinely just wants to do the right thing in that moment.
Yeah, he's not coming to take control or be the master. He just wants to do what he can to do the best thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's for sure. Like my other favorite, and I think my only favorite part of that movie is where he's in the midst of fighting the rest of the Justice League, and the Flash tries to get behind him.
Oh yeah,
and he has that moment where he's in the Speed Force and he sees that Superman can see him.
That was amazing too. I have to give him, when he glances over at Flash in slow motion and Flash's reaction. They cut to him. He's like, "What the fuck?"
And also the look in Henry Cavill's face at that point, you actually believe that maybe he just throttle that fire to death kind of thing. But yeah, that was a great moment.
It was,
and just lost in a sea of bullshit.
Lost in a Frankenstein movie known as Justice League. I mean, that was just.
But I really hope for good things going forward. But yeah, you guys had interesting and differential perspectives on Aquaman.
Yeah.
Again, I thought it was fun, but yeah, it was weird. so weird.
I certainly thought it was fun. I also thought the script was a complete mess, but I guess that's better than it provided me more of a better reaction than I had to Batman versus Superman, if that counts for anything.
Oh, absolutely. I think right after Aquaman, I was actually quite positive, and then afterwards, with a little digestion and a second viewing, I was like,
upon some analysis, that script is kind of strange.
Definitely,
there's a lot of weird choices in there, but it's an interesting looking movie with some definitely embraces the comic book origins that it's come from. So
I think that was a cool aspect of it. They didn't shy away from any of the weirdness and the bullshit. Again, he literally rode a seahorse to the finale. You know what I mean? It was
you had seahorses and sharks and giant crabs and unicorn seahorses.
The undersea creatures roaring fucking really bothered me, though. That's physically,
because that's impossible.
Impossible, yeah. That really bothered me. When the great white sharks were it's like, oh, come on. Oh,
no, this isn't scientifically correct.
But again, when I stopped and thought about the rest of it, I was like, what am I really arguing about?
At that
here?
point, you're watching an Aquaman movie. You can't, the science isn't going to add up at any point.
And also, Momoa brought in the lady vote for that movie quite heavily. Jesus, my mother is 55 years old, and I couldn't shut her up about Momoa over Christmas and stuff. I don't want to hear.
I think that was it. I mean, that was definitely the intent, to bring in Momoa so that the female fans would be happy with how he looks with his shirt off.
I mean, there's been no shortage of pretty boys.
And the male fans. Yeah, there's been no shortage of pretty boys. He's not necessarily.
No, he's more the.
They made him like
the bad boy, I guess.
Bad boy, yeah.
He seems like a dude I would love to party with, though, man. Jesus, he's
Momoa or Aquaman?
Well, both.
Are they one and the same at this point?
Maybe, but yeah, they seem like pretty much it's the same character.
Yeah, right. He's just playing himself,
which is a great place to be as an actor, I guess. But
it is. Well, I think we've bored enough people to this point. So
yeah, fair enough. we can keep talking about comics forever, but yeah,
we could definitely keep talking about comics. But I'd be happy to have you on again, and especially if you have any more findings that are worth talking about, we can do that, or we can just nerd out about comics and movies and shit too.
Either or, I'm happy to do.
There's more to Adam Morris than just being a scientist. So,
no, we haven't even delved into the raving years and the electronic music scene and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's I was there at the cusp of the electronic music scene in Toronto in the early '90s. So,
oh man, that's OG status.
It is. When we switched over from acid jazz and shit like that into like jungle and house, it was.
Oh no. Well, that'll have to come at another time when you rejoin the show, because this isn't a one-time thing. I've told all my guests this. This is a reoccurring thing that you can be on as many times as I'll allow.
And as the society demands, I suppose, yeah.
As society demands, yes. Well, is there anything you want to plug before you jump out of here? Or
no, again, for the Nation members, I'm switching my Twitter account over to @adrock_king for geek-related science stuff. So
there you go.
Follow me there. And otherwise, yeah, I'll be on the Jock and Nerd Nation page anytime.
A Jock and Nerd Nation page, hopefully. Whenever we have a science topic on the Jock and Nerd show, you'll probably join us for that. Or if there's anything you want to join for that, I'm sure Imran will be happy to have you on with us. I know I would be. And yeah, we'll catch you there on the Nation or @rock_king on Twitter. And any other scientific findings that ever get published by the Canadian government might have your work in it too, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure.
All right, there you go. All right, guys.